Okay, it is 3 o'clock. Should we begin?
I think so.
All right. So we will have the meeting begin now. Good afternoon. Welcome to DCA's Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee meeting being held via teleconference on Ring Central on Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. Could we please have roll call?
Good afternoon, Chair Palmer. Vice Chair Keegan. Let's see, I saw her. Committee Member Swenson.
I'm here.
Committee Member Whaley.
Present.
Committee Member Berrigan Perea. Committee Member Giacomo. Committee Member Glosky. Committee Member Shia. Committee Member Welch.
I think folks need to unmute themselves to say here, because I see Chief Welch is here and DC Giacomo is here.
I'm here. I'm here.
Thanks, Nasli. Committee Member Cosio.
Here.
Committee Member Gonzalez Potter.
Here.
Committee Member Cox. Committee Member Tarango. Committee Member Wallace.
Here.
Committee Member Mann.
Here.
Committee Member Liebig.
Here.
Committee Member Lytle.
Present.
Committee Member Moran. Committee Member Teaba. Committee Member Robertson. Committee Member Merlo.
Here.
Committee Member Worth.
Here.
Committee Member Hardesty. And then I'm going to go back around. Committee Member Swenson. Committee Member Berrigan Perea. Committee Member Glosky. Committee Member Shia. Committee Member Cox. Committee Member Tarango. Committee Member Moran. Committee Member Teaba. Committee Member Robertson. Committee Member Hardesty. Well, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, then let's get into some housekeeping. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sarah Palmer. I am the chair of the SEC. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your taking the time to participate in this process, providing your thoughts on ways we can provide a community focus on the engineering aspect of a proposed conveyance project. For the record, this meeting is being conducted via Ring Central and teleconference to ensure that we're adhering to requirements related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of the SEC is to create a forum for Delta stakeholders to provide input and feedback on technical and engineering issues related to the DCA's current activities. The SEC is a formal advisory body to the DCA Board of Directors. It is subject to the public transparency laws applicable to local public agencies like the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. So we have some practices for our virtual meeting, a slight change in platform this time. And you may have noticed things are a little bit different on the Ring Central platform. To continue to support a secure meeting environment, DCA is using a slightly different virtual meeting format, which places SEC members and presenters in a separate virtual meeting room from meeting attendees. That said, the SEC discussion process and public comment periods will remain consistent with past meetings. However, attendees will be muted and not have a video option unless they are speaking during public comment. At that point, we will unmute you, and it will be up to speakers themselves whether or not they activate their video. We, of course, prefer that you use your video option to support a better meeting experience. It's always nice to see people's faces when they're talking. As in past meetings, SEC members will have complete control of their video and audio at all times. So SEC members, we will not be muting you. You must mute yourself, hopefully when you're not speaking, so we don't have so much background information. And I will too, because otherwise the dog's going to make a big ruckus. Okay, in terms of public comment, if you wish to provide public comment on agenda items, please complete the online public comment form at, and it's https:// it's a tinyurl.com, and then there's a slash, and it says DCA public comment -SEC, and that DCA public comment is all one word, and do that by 4 p.m. please. This link can be found on the dcdca.org website on the SEC agenda. And you'll notice the website looks a little different because our folks have been working to make it much more interesting and full of all kinds of good links. Okay, so once we get to that point in the meeting, our facilitator, Valerie Martinez, will call out to each person to speak. The line will be opened and the speaker will provide comments, and you will be timed depending on how many people there are. The public may also provide written public comment by email to, and it's all one word, publiccomment@dcdca.org. All written comments received prior to the conclusion of the meeting will be included in the written record for the meeting, but will not be read during the meeting, but everybody will have access to it. We will follow the same process for public comment on the non-agendized items. So in terms of SEC comments and questions, during the discussion portion of our meeting, SEC members will use the raise hand function. So if you look down at the bottom, there is a raised hand function for you to use, and it's within Ring Central. Ms. Martinez will call the name of the SEC member to make a comment or ask a question. So do make sure that you know where that raise hand function is, please. As always, I want to remind our committee members that as well as the public, the topics being discussed in this venue are engineering and construction logistics related to a proposed conveyance project. So we ask that discussions please stay on topic. It is a long meeting. All we can address is what is within the DCA purview. Okay, so another thing is that you will notice that there is a new chat platform, but it is not disabled. However, we're not using it. So even though you see a chat platform, we're not using it. So please don't bother trying to put things in chat because we will not use it, even though that capability looks to be available. It is not. Okay, then one other thing I want to do is we have a new ex officio member, and I'd like to welcome Chief David Welch of the Cortland Fire Department. We're really grateful for his input. I think somebody who has that kind of experience is really necessary for our group. The new member directory has been circulated, and it will include his contact information. And as far as a new member of the SEC group, the applications are being taken and for the representative for Hood. So please pay attention to that, and we're certainly looking forward to rounding out the input from folks. Okay, then let us move on to item 3, which is our minutes review. And does anyone have any changes, comments, or questions about the minutes? And note that you have until Friday to make adjustments by sending those to Jasmine Runquist. So are there any comments or changes that anybody wishes to make? Jasmine, could you look at that?
Looking for any hands up.
There aren't any. I think we're good.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so moving on. Then we get to, I'm going to ask at this point DWR's Environmental Program Manager, Carrie Buckman, to provide an update on the CEQA process, as well as to introduce information on an upcoming survey. So Carrie, could you take it away?
Thank you, Chair Palmer, and thanks everyone for having me again this month to give you guys an update. So if we want to move on to the next slide. I try to show this slide every month just so that we can talk about where we are in the process. So as last month, I've still got highlighted the scoping summary report because we have completed that part of the process. So we have completed the notice of preparation, the scoping meetings, and the summary report that documents the scoping process. From here, we're working on reaching out to agencies, which is the next step, and we've made some progress on line 2 with project definition, where we are working on formulating alternatives and describing those alternatives. So I think we can move on to the next slide. So I wanted to just give an update on a number of different areas that we're working in. First is the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. And for CEQA, we've been working to start the process that we need to, we're working on all of the information that we need to collect for the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. So we're looking at developing information on existing conditions, and we're also identifying the methods that we're going to use to analyze impacts to different potential resource areas. For the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, we discussed last month that the Corps of Engineers has released a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement, and they're accepting scoping comments now, and those scoping comments are due to the Corps by October 20th. For soil investigations, we've talked in the past about the initial study and mitigated negative declaration that we developed to consider additional fieldwork. And we are able to start fieldwork now under that document. So we are looking at some priority sites on public properties or properties with willing landowners to start later this month or early October. And they'll start by having site clearances at those sites where we have biological representatives and cultural representatives and drilling representatives go out. A whole group of people go out and look at the sites and make sure that they will work for the investigation. Additionally, we're reaching out to private landowners to try to obtain entry permission to use their properties. So what we're doing is we called potential landowners for the first set of work, and we also sent them information through the mail, and we're working to negotiate what's called a temporary entry permit. And a temporary entry permit includes a set of procedures for accessing the property. You know, it includes notice requirements that we need to provide notice before we would go out onto the property, information about the types of work and timelines for those types of work. And it includes compensation that we would provide for the permission to go out on their property for these investigations. If anyone has any questions about those, if you've received one and you have questions about it, please feel free to talk to DWR or the DCA about the contents of those documents and how things would work in more detail. And then I wanted to just touch on community benefits. So during our last meeting, there were quite a few questions about or comments on community benefits. And I just wanted to let people know what's going on behind the scenes to prepare for some work on community benefits. So what we're doing is we're taking a first stab at developing the start of a framework for community benefits discussions. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to sort of document our goals and objectives as part of this process and start looking at some information about process and procedures and share some of that both internally with DWR, with the water agencies who would eventually be funding this project. And then there are a few agencies that we talk a lot to them about community benefits, including the Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Protection Commission. So I'd like to talk to those agencies as well before this goes public at the SEC meetings. And so what we'd like to do is start to introduce those topics in December and then really focus on community benefits early in 2021. I think we can move to the next slide. So I'd also like to provide some information about what we're looking for from the DCA. There were some questions during past meetings about when the DCA's deliverables were going to be coming to DWR. So for the east and central corridors, these were parts of the proposed project. We received some information that we needed for environmental work in August, and the full project engineering report is going to be complete at the end of 2020. For the Bethany corridor, this is a newer effort, and we're hoping to receive the environmental, well, we're planning to receive the environmental data from DCA at the end of the year. And this is, again, information that we can use to get started on the environmental process. It sort of kickstarts the work, but the full process will not be documented until we receive the project engineering report, which will be in April of 2021. And the project engineering report includes more detailed information on the engineering that's the basis of the project description. So we can move on to the next slide. So I wanted to introduce the survey that we're planning to release to try to help collect information from environmental justice communities in the Delta. And so I wanted to talk a little about the goals and objectives, and then I'm going to hand this over to Genevieve Taylor, who's going to talk more about the survey. So first, the reasons that we're doing this survey are to learn about the places and resources that are important to people. We really want to have a robust understanding and some documentation of the baseline values, and we know that that will improve the CEQA analysis of the potential for disproportionate impacts to disadvantaged communities in the Delta. And additionally, we want to identify potential project-related impacts and benefits for the Delta's diverse communities. We really want to understand and identify ways in which the project may affect these places. And so the more information that we have through the survey, the better. We think that we might have information that will help us consider ways to reduce impacts or consider potentially benefits to disadvantaged communities, which ties us back to the community benefits discussion we were just having. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Genevieve Taylor. And Genevieve works for Ag Innovations, which is an independent facilitator, and they've been helping us develop and implement this survey. So Genevieve, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. We've, of course, been watching since we came on board in January. And Ag Innovations is a nonprofit. We work throughout California around issues related at the intersection of agriculture and natural resources. And we do both facilitation of collaboration and facilitation of community input. And so here we are working on community input with a specific focus on environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. And so, you know, I think just one thing that I would say before we look at the survey is that when we talk about disadvantaged communities, we're really looking at communities of, we're really looking at historically burdened, underrepresented, low income and otherwise vulnerable populations. And but in this survey, we get to talk to and survey everyone who lives, works, or plays in the Delta. One other thing to point out is that this survey is, while we really want everyone to participate, but it will not actually, it won't reflect unique tribal concerns and interests. So it's not part of the tribal engagement. It's not a formal part of the tribal engagement process. It's really had a different focus. And so we just, for our tribal stakeholder members, we'd really love to have you reach out to your communities around this, but it's not focused on tribal concerns. And so I think that's important as we go in about this, and I'd be happy to answer other questions. Let's see, so next slide. All right, so this has been an exciting survey to design. We're using a platform called MetroQuest. It's really known for its interactive, easy way of working around surveys. I'll show you a couple of things that I'm excited about as we move forward. The intent of this is both to collect data and provide education, and we do that because we believe that people need, a baseline of context or information to be able to provide input via a survey. However, that's really hard when we're all using our smartphones in the grocery lines to be able to get. So this kind of goes that line of providing some information and also, asking questions that will really get to achieve our goals. So we've intended it to be quick and engaging. We are employing some robust marketing to encourage broad participation. So everything from social media to postcards. And we've decided that in an era of COVID, that a digital survey is even more important because it allows us to reach people throughout the area. I will say too that we're especially mindful of the bandwidth issues that are in the Delta, and so our postcards are targeting folks that have low internet, and then we have a whole range of other strategies to get to folks in a physical way as well, including flyers. And really at the heart of our strategy is working with community organizations who are the partners that these communities really trust. Next slide. All right, so this is, you saw a little bit of the welcome page on the last slide, and this is the first slide. It talks about what's important to you. So the idea here is that you drag one of these priorities up above that top line. There's a whole range of questions, or excuse me, some priorities that people might choose, everything from affordable quality housing, historic and cultural preservation, healthy natural environment, recreation and public spaces, preserving agriculture, roads and public transportation, et cetera. So there's a number of different ways that we're asking for folks, but we're also assuming that we're not going to get it all on this. And so we have suggesting another priority on this particular one. The intention of this is to help people, you know, get excited about the survey and to help them feel kind of it's easy and that we can, they can offer real content easily within it. So the next slide. This slide I'm pretty excited about. So this is a spot where folks can talk about the places that matter to them. We're asking participants to drag and drop at least 3 map markers to show the places that are special to you, and then each one of those has a little bit more information that they'll ask you for. So for example, around fishing, we'll ask how often do you fish and what kinds of fish do you eat? And the reason for this is that, again, just as Carrie was saying, we're really hoping to identify those areas of project-related impact and potential benefit that might come out of this, but we won't know that unless we know what's important to the people who live and work in the Delta. So next slide, thank you. This is our slide and screen that really tries to get to some of the nuance that folks have about what their experience is in the Delta. So you'll see what do you like best about the Delta, what if any concerns do you currently have about living or working in the Delta. We've gotten some guidance, and thank you very much, from Barbara, Berrig, and Perea, and others in the Delta. So we have other partners as well that we've asked about how do we frame these questions so that they resonate in the Delta. And again, we're not assuming that we got it all, and we're hoping that folks will also offer their own ideas about, you know, what they like and what their concerns are. We'll then talk about your economic well-being, which is that second subscreen, your experience in nature. So, you know, what's important about your natural spaces, and you know, what would improve your experience, like safer swimming and waterways is one. So we have a couple there. And then we also have in your voice, it's an opportunity for folks to share what their experience has been with previous processes and what their perspective is on the project. Yeah, so I think that's all for this one, and thank you. All right, so we expect the survey to be in the field between September 29th through November 30th. We will have the survey in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Tagalog. With this, we should be able to get about 95% of the residents in the 5-county Delta region with those languages. So that's why we've gone with those 4 languages. Marketing will include a postcard to about 13,000 people that really have been identified based on both income as well as their internet bandwidth. And then also an e-blast, social media, flyers, and we're making a lot of phone calls right now. So, you know, if there's a community or organizations you're hoping that we're reaching out to be sure that we're sending this survey to those folks. We'd be happy to hear from you, and you can let your liaison know. They'll connect you with us or get those pieces tied down.
Great. All right, are there any questions from the committee? Oh, go ahead, Genevieve. I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
You know what? I'd forgotten about this. So this, yourdeltayourvoice.org is the website that we'll be using. We'll have different ways of tracking things via QR codes, and so making it easy for people to get onto the website. And again, yeah, we'd love to have your help in spreading the word. And Heather at aginnovations.org is the easiest way to access that outside of your liaison.
Great. We have a couple hands up, but just to repeat that this is one of several tools that are being used for outreach, that this isn't designed to replace any of the significant outreach. A great example that you gave was the tribal consultation that is done by Anacita and her crew. But this is just another tool, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. All right, well, we have Barbara, we have Jim Wallace and Douglas who have their hands up. Barbara, go ahead.
Two quick questions. I heard you talk about access to swimming, but I didn't see the language up there. So yeah. Did that make it in about surface water? It did okay.
Actually. So it's under your experience in nature, and I really appreciated that call.
Okay, and then the second question is, most of the Filipino community speaks English. They take a lot of pride in speaking English. But you don't have Hmong up there or any of the other Cambodian, Laotian languages. And they do an awful lot of fishing in the Delta.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is then, why that choice?
Yeah.
Okay. So we went with Tagalog because about 6%, in the census, it says actually that 6% are Tagalog only. And there's actually quite a concentration in the Solano County area. So,
okay.
So that's one of the reasons we chose it. It's also it just really surfaced as, from the census, it was, that was in particular an important one. And the languages, what our plan is to learn as much as we can from this round of using languages and seeing what's needed. So we'll certainly be listening and learning, and if there's really a desire for something else, then we'll put that into the hopper. But this is the first of several surveys. So
okay, if it's several surveys, because what I'm thinking of is that you could actually maybe directly work with Apsara, because maybe they could do the translation for you, and that would bring you on thousands of responses.
Yeah, so. They were happy to. They were actually I think after you, they were my third call. So
okay.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be working with them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks so much. I have Jim, Douglas, and then Melissa Tayaba. Any questions for Carrie or Genevieve?
Yeah, this is Jim. I have a question for Carrie. Carrie, in CEQA, there is no such thing as environmental justice resource. So environmental justice is applied differently in CEQA because it's supposed to assess the physical effects of a project on a community. And so I think it'd be helpful to clarify exactly how CEQA addresses environmental justice. It's first. Secondly, will this data from the survey be shared with the Corps of Engineers while they're preparing their NEPA document? Because NEPA does have an environmental justice resource category. It's very specific about what you're supposed to do and what data you're supposed to use, how you identify low-income communities at risk. So a little background, I think, would be helpful. And then the last thing I want to say is that there has been a survey circulating in the Delta for a couple of months now about water usage and income, and it's been resisted, quite frankly, by large portions of the population because it was never explained very well, and because it seemed to be invasive, and it seemed to duplicate a lot of what's going to be in the 2020 census. So just a word of warning, I think that unless this survey is presented in the kind of light that makes people comfortable, I think you're going to get resistance in filling this thing out. And I don't have a solution for that, but I've seen it quite a bit here in Cortland and in Hood, people asking me, well, do we fill out these surveys or not? I won't tell you what I said. So that's it. Thanks. Just a little clarification would help.
Okay, so I'll start talking a little about EJ, and then maybe Genevieve, you could talk about the measures that we're taking to try to encourage participation. So while we are preparing separate documents for the environmental impact report and environmental impact statement, for DWR, for our document, we're including all CEQA and NEPA requirements in our document. We're kind of going above and beyond. While it is not a joint document, we are including NEPA requirements as well. And the reason is that as the project proponent, we know that a lot of what the Corps is going to be doing is incorporating information from our document by reference or using that as the basis for their document. And so we want to have as much as they need. And if there are any other subsequent NEPA compliance efforts that are needed, we want the information to be there and be available. So we are planning to structure our environmental justice analysis pretty similarly to what's required for NEPA. I would probably need to get a little bit more detail to go into a lot more depth than that, but I can do that at an upcoming meeting if that would be helpful. And I think with that, Genevieve, if you want to provide some information about the survey publication process. There we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jim, you know, we've definitely been thinking about the kinds of concerns that you raised and how it would be received. I mean, I think another distraction will be the election, and obviously not a distraction, but that'll be like a big front and center part of what's happening as we're also getting this out. So here's our strategy. One is that it's really important that we work with community organizations who have trusted relationships and give them enough information so that they can speak to it. And so that's what we're doing right now, and that's been a big push. I think another piece is that we've tried to make our marketing much, you know, engaging and to help people really know that their input is important, and that and we've spent a considerable amount of time looking at the language to make it accessible and inviting, and also to assure them about how their information is being used and why we're using the information, why we're asking those questions. So that's the strategy that's been in the survey. I think the third thing is that we are, well, as we're working in these different ways, we're hoping that folks are really, that they have several points of contact, and that those several points of contact come from different places. So they might get something in the mail, or they might see something on Facebook. They might see something with a community organization that they're involved with, and that will help them feel not only that it's important, but that it's worthwhile enough to be able to be involved. So that's how our approach is. And, you know, we'll be learning a lot and really listening. And so if there's reactions that you see, we'd love to hear them as the survey launches. So.
And are you, just for clarification, Genevieve, also asking the committee members here to push that out as well? I know it's going to be on social media and such. Would that be helpful?
That would be really helpful. And especially, you know, knowing that you'd only push out surveys that you felt were important, it would mean a lot to know that you were sending them along, or at least, you know, responding that this is a worthwhile endeavor. So I know you should look at the survey in a week or so when it comes out and let us know, you know, like how comfortable do you feel putting it out? But our intent was, you know, to have it be something that would be really useful in a lot of different ways and would assuage those concerns.
Great. All right, Douglas.
Well, I'm glad to share with you that I'm involved in the survey by being reading Chinese for the questionnaire. And my question now today is, well, we will talk about pushing it to a further boundary. So what about Elk Grove? Is Elk Grove an area that we can push our survey into?
Yeah, that is a good question. I was just looking. I mean, I would say yes. You know, what we're doing is, yeah, absolutely. What we're doing is, even though it's, you know, there's a statutory delta, of course, but we also know that people who live or may not live or work may play in the delta or vice versa. So we really want people who have a special relationship and connection to the delta. And we are asking for folks' zip codes. So we'll know, you know, hey, if Elk Grove folks are a part of it, what that means about their relationship to the delta. So that demographic information will be really important for us in understanding where folks are at and what that means. So. Yeah, thank you.
The bigger Chinese population is in Elk Grove rather than in the geographical delta.
Let's get it there then, and that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Douglas. All right, we have Melissa Tayaba, and then Barbara has another question. So Melissa?
Hi, I was just wondering if you could actually explain to me again how it would work for tribal groups.
Yeah, great question. So we would just love to have you participate, like first and foremost. So if you live, work, and play in the Delta, we would love to have you participate. What we know though is that there's gaps. Because it's not part of the formal process of tribal engagement, and because there's sensitive information that is a part of it, that, you know, I would presume would be a part of it, then a tribal member's answer. We just know that information might be better sought in a different method. I will say that there is a question under the maps about historical and cultural resources. We have identified that as confidential, but what we'll be doing is looking at the answers, and if we have even an inkling of something being confidential, we'll talk to Anasita about it.
Just to add in from DWR's perspective, we really are counting on the AB 52 and the tribal engagement process to really get information from the tribes in a way that we will manage and really carefully keep confidential and make sure it's addressed in a complex way that is what the tribes are looking for. So this is a really good way to collect a lot of information quickly, but we know that this is not the main way that we will be looking for information from tribes.
Okay, we would definitely like to participate, so just let us know.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
Great, awesome. All right, Barbara, and then Anna. Barbara.
Hi, I just want to share something because of the comment that Jim Wallace made. In the North Delta communities, 52% of the people who live there, in some communities, actually speak a language other than English as their first language. And there is a poverty rate among communities of color between 13 and 18%. We commend DWR for getting this work done and going above beyond the requirements of CEQA. Because the only people who brought people from environmental justice communities in the North Delta to the table during the water rights hearing, or the water hearing at the Water Board during the last round of water fix, was Restore the Delta. And the Water Board acknowledged and understood that there is a human right to water consideration that goes with this project. And for DWR to step up and do the surveys and bring the full community to the table, we think is absolutely outstanding. We think it's some of the best action you have taken as a group. And the last part of this that I just cannot stress enough is that there is a systemic history of isolation of communities of color from the Delta and from landowners in the Delta. And in this day and age, and with what is happening across the country in terms of equity, access to resources, and public health, we have a moral obligation to get as many voices at the table. More doesn't mean that certain landowners are underrepresented. More just means there's more information to work with to do what's best by the entire community. Thank you.
All All right, thank you, Barbara. Anna, just 1 second. I noticed that an attendee, and I wasn't able to get over fast enough, had a hand up. I want to reiterate the fact that if in fact you want to provide public comment, please use the link that is on the agenda in order to get to the public comment request form, and we will make sure that we include you in public comment, okay? And if in fact your hand goes up at some point, you know, we'll figure it out, because I know that we're all trying to figure this out together, and we want more people, not the fewer, participating. But for the moment, we are in the SEC portion of the discussion, so not the public comment portion. Anna Swenson.
Good afternoon. I commend your efforts here to try to get more input from a more diverse group. I've been working in the Delta for approximately 9 years, and I worry, and I understand the limitations with COVID, but I have always found that there is a greater response to paper. And I know that that is a very old-fashioned way, but it's an old-fashioned Delta. And so I know that I'm gonna get requests for the survey to be on some sort of a paper document, and they're probably going to look for it in the post offices, because that's our form of communication. And so I'm wondering if there can be a format that can be paper and that can be turned in. I mean, the Q code is super cool. My kids would totally be able to do the Q code. I'm not sure I would be able to pull off the Q code. So I'm just sort of reminding you of our audience. And so I think that, you know, a lot of the folks, I know even for the census, they wanted to do the census by hand. They didn't want to turn it in online. So just a thought. I mean, I know you're in you're the, you know, the vision that you have, but just some experience and just an idea. And you know, I know I'm going to find myself probably printing your survey and giving it to people. So just thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Really appreciate that. And we'll definitely take that into consideration. Maybe I'll just say that, you know, we've been surprised actually by the number of, by what bandwidth looks like in the Delta. And we really do believe that this is going to be a good way. But if we find that people need support in filling out the survey, we have a hotline that will be available to be able to help them fill that out. And Anna, you know, we can touch base if you're getting requests for that. So do be in touch with us about that. And we'll certainly take into consideration those other ideas about the post office, et cetera. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
And Genevieve, the platform that you're using can be used both with a computer as well as with your cell phone, correct?
Yeah, it's actually really designed for cell phones. And we've been testing it for older cell phones, especially because of the, you know, concern about really wanting people to be able to use it effectively and knowing that not everyone's got the latest, greatest.
Awesome. All right, Jim Cox.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Barbara was saying. I think this is a great idea and a great project, and I'm really glad to see that fishing was included in the topics there. And I just have one suggestion, that I'm on the committee that's from the Delta Protection Commission. They would be a good source of getting this out as well. That's it.
Great.
All right. Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks for everyone. I think that's all the comments that we have so far. So I think we're good to go. And again, a reminder, if in fact you have public comment or questions that you'd like to, or comments that you want to make during public comment, please do so via the online form. All right, Sarah.
All righty, then let's go on to the next item, which is 4B. And I'd like DCA Executive Director Catherine Mallon, please introduce our discussion on citing for the Bethany alternative. Thank you. Take it away.
Yeah, just we've got two technical topics here, and we're going to present them fairly consistently with how we did the East and Central. The first presentation is around the siting analysis. So there's a number of facilities unique to Bethany Alternative, and we've done a siting analysis, and we want to present to you the findings there, seek your comment. And then there's a second presentation on Anna Swenson's favorite RTM topic. So we're going to go through RTM management and our proposal for that on the Bethany Alternative. It's a bit different than the East and Central alignment, where there was a significant need for use of that material on the project. And Graham Bradner's going to do both presentations today. Phil couldn't join us. He's on holiday, so Graham is stepping in on the facility sightings work. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Graham.
Great. Thanks, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Jasmine, I'm gonna take over. There you go. All right, does that look okay? Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks okay.
Somebody say yes. Okay, great. All right, so let's jump in. We're gonna start with the facility siting first, and then the RTM second, as Catherine laid out. So just as a refresher, and then we'll highlight the Bethany alternative as part of this as well. So just working from north to south, we've got the northern piece up here, which is the intakes and which includes the Twin Cities complex. That's common to both the central and eastern, as well as the Bethany alternative. So those are all common features. And then we have the eastern tunnel corridor that runs down to Lower Roberts and then swings down over to the southern forebay. And then we've got the central tunnel corridor, which goes down through the central delta and also connects into the southern forebay. Looking at the Bethany alternative and where we're going to spend most of our time talking about the facility siting is this lower piece down here at the bottom, where the Bethany alternative really deviates from the eastern corridor by heading further south on the east side of Clifton Court Forebay and further south and connecting directly into Bethany Reservoir. So as we start talking about the siting and so on in the next couple of slides, we're not really going to be talking about the area north of Lower Roberts because that's all common to the eastern corridor. But when we get into the RTM, we are going to revisit conditions at Twin Cities just because the different approach to RTM management affects the Twin Cities launch site. So here we are focusing in on that Bethany alternative piece downstream of the Lower Roberts launch shaft. So it really deviates at that point at Lower Roberts from the launch shaft there, and then kind of beelines straight for Bethany Reservoir. Bethany Reservoir sits up in the foothills. You can see it labeled down there on the south end of the slide. It's in the foothills of the Coast Range. It's up at about elevation 245, 250. And so by comparison, a lot of the elevations within the delta, and particularly the central delta even, are down in the minus 10, minus 15 foot elevation range. So this is a different approach, a different alternative, particularly on the downstream end here, where we're looking at a different approach to getting water into the state water project and potentially the federal project. So it does, the Bethany alternative does eliminate the southern forebay. The pumping plant, is still required for the Bethany alternative, and in fact, it's got a bigger job to do for Bethany. But the southern forebay is eliminated, as well as the tunnel connections down to the state water project.
Graham, we're having a tough time hearing you. Graham, we're having a tough time hearing you. Yeah. Maybe if you shut off your video, just to, conserve some bandwidth.
Okay, I'll try that, Valerie. And if it doesn't work, I would say just give me another heads up, and I'll call in and do it that way.
Okay. Great.
So I stopped the video, and let's see if does this sound any better at the moment?
Sounds good.
Okay, all right, let's stick with this, but tell me if it doesn't get better and we've got another alternative. Okay, so do I need to go back over the overview stuff here, Valerie? How bad was all
I think we caught everything but like that last sentence, but I think we're good.
All right, perfect. Okay, we'll keep going. So here's an overview of the configuration down on the southern end of the project. The water will flow in through the tunnel. You can see down here at the bottom, down at the typical tunnel depths, and then up through the main shaft. This is a multi-purpose shaft. This is also going to feed the surge basin that will respond if there are any abrupt pumping plant shutdowns or anything like that that would create a surge within the tunnel. But the water would flow through the tunnel, up through that main shaft, through a large conduit into the wet well of the pumping plant. And then that pumping plant would be responsible for lifting all that water from tunnel depth and then pushing it all the way up the hill, up to Bethany Reservoir. So that pumping plant has a pretty big job to do. The pipeline, it would be through pipelines that it would push the water up to Bethany Reservoir. And there would be also surge tanks associated with the pipeline there, again, also to address any unexpected or abrupt shutdowns within the system. So in terms of the system components, they're just as an overview, again, to touch on things, we're going to begin from the Lower Roberts launch shaft, and there would be 2 maintenance shafts as the tunnel would be excavated down towards the pumping plant. That's because the drive distance is right at about 15 miles, so there would be 2 maintenance shafts required for that. The pumping plant to lift that water and push it up to Bethany Reservoir. The surge basin adjacent to the pumping plant to release water if there were a surge event within the system. 4 parallel pipelines to convey that water up to Bethany Reservoir from the pumping plant and their associated surge tanks. And then the discharge structure that would discharge directly into Bethany Reservoir. So now we're going to go into the station and the surge basin siting analysis that's been on the southern end of the project. This is down around south of Clifton Court Forebay. You can see Bethany Reservoir highlighted here down the south end of the image. Just for reference, this is the Banks, the State Water Project approach canal here on the left side, and then the federal approach canal on the right side. There's several major utilities and gas lines and high power transmission lines that zigzag across the site here. There's a lot of conservation easements and preserves that really cover the whole frontage of Bethany Reservoir. And so those are certainly a constraint when we're looking at different siting options for the facilities. I've already pointed out the state and federal water project facilities. A key feature here very near to the site is the Mountain House School, which is located here. So that's a key consideration in siting of the facilities, as well as the community of Mountain House, also not very far away. And then you're going to see in some of the upcoming slides, the topography here starts to change pretty dramatically. It's generally pretty flat down here around the Jones Pumping Plant label and around Byron Highway and so on. Although it is climbing, you just can't really necessarily tell when you're down there. But when you hit the foothills here, it really starts to climb pretty steeply. And so that steep grade is also something that needs to be dealt with in terms of siting.
You're starting to go underwater again.
Yeah, Graham, we're losing you again.
So we looked at, oh, that's a bummer. So yeah. I think what I'll need to do is, can we pause for just 2 minutes and let me switch over and call in manually?
Please, yeah, I think that would be cleaner.
Okay. Catherine, do you want to keep going with this, or do you want to give me a minute to switch over?
Take a minute to switch over, that's fine. Okay. As long as we keep this slide up here.
And Graham, I just want to point out that sometimes when you turn your video off, it helps with the connectivity because it doesn't take up as much bandwidth.
He did that already.
He did that, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I wonder, Valerie, if we should give everybody a chance to take a potty break or something.
So early. We needed this to happen right around 4:15. And Karen, I do see you. I will hold questions if we could until he finishes this this higher level discussion, if that's okay.
Can we go back one slide?
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I think it was hard to hear him.
Well, I also think it'll give people a chance to look at what the existing conditions are out there. So Jasmine, can you, oh.
With Graham controlling.
Graham's controlling it, never mind.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go. So there's.
So Graham, are you on the call? I'm not.
Once Jennifer transfers him over, we'll let you know once he's in at the panel.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Graham, I transferred you over. Can you try to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I had to wait for Jennifer to switch that. Okay.
Awesome.
So
The dulcet
that sounds
tones
okay.
Can you?
Yeah, sorry.
Catherine had asked that you just kind of reflect a little bit more on this slide before you moving on, please.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that, everybody. Bandwidth is at a premium these days with school and everything. So, all right. So back to this slide. So these really are some of the key constraints that we're going to deal with for both the pumping plant siting, and you're going to see a lot of them come back up for the pipeline routing as well. There's several major conservation easements that really cover the whole frontage of the hillside here as we try and look at different locations to get up to and route to Bethany Reservoir. There's a lot of utilities zigzagging and crisscrossing through, and in fact, we're just showing some of the high voltage transmission lines here. There's a lot more out there, and oftentimes multiple lines running in parallel. So there's quite a bit of major infrastructure. There's a large diameter high pressure gas line that runs kind of right across the site here along this dashed line. There's some pretty steep hills as it starts climbing up from the base here, and so looking for appropriate routes to get up to the reservoir and appropriate places to site the pumping station. The topography definitely comes into play. And then Mountain House School, which is located right here as it's labeled, in the community of Mountain House. These are certainly serious considerations when looking at different options for siting facilities within the project. Let me just check again. Is the audio holding stable, Valerie?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. All right. Okay, good. Hopefully that's it. Okay, so we looked at a total of 10 potential pump station sites, and so these are labeled as they're shown on the graphic here. We had a few sites that were clustered right around the rim of the reservoir, looking at potentially a cavern-style pumping plant. We had a few more locations that were partway down the hillside, so kind of in between the flat ground and right up adjacent to the reservoir. And then we had 2 locations down on the lower elevation natural grades down here by Byron Highway, sites 6 and 10. In terms of the comparison criteria, we looked at, there were several sub-criteria considered, but the main groupings are shown: system operations and flexibility considerations, construction considerations, geotech, property and land use, and environmental settings. So here's a summary of the siting analysis and comparison. I'll point out that you see site 3 is eliminated. This was a location that we had originally cited, but then as we brought in more information and started layering things on top, we realized that site 3 really was not viable, and we just eliminated it before we even launched into the evaluation process. For the remaining sites, you can see the color codes here with the sub-criteria. The system is, as many of you have seen already, green is favorable, yellow is more neutral, and orange is negative with respect to those individual sub criteria. We have an importance factor that was also applied, so that's listed here in a column on the left. As a result of this analysis, we ended up identifying that site 10 was the highest ranking and therefore preferred site for the pumping plant and associated surge basin. So I'll show you, remind you which one that is. So here on the screen you can see site 10. So this is a location that's down and pretty close to the existing federal pumping plant, which is here. The summary of some of the key drivers for that, it really, siting it here avoids the conservation easements and preserves that are up around Bethany Reservoir, although we do need to deal with those for the pipeline routing. We have very good access from Byron Highway, but even more importantly, from Interstate 580 to the south. We're looking at a logistics plan that would rely heavily on coming in from Interstate 580 to the extent possible, to the maximum extent possible. The pump station configuration would be very similar to a lot of existing DWR facilities. So pumping from the base of the hill, the same way that the Banks pumping plant sits down at the base of the hill and pushes water up through a series of pen stops. There's adequate space over in this area, so we're not space constrained for this site. And then it's kind of in a sweet spot from an existing topography perspective. We have a couple of different things to balance with respect to topography. If we get too high up on the hill, then the surge elevations, the water elevations that we're dealing with are way down deep, and so we end up with a big hole that's required for that to function right. And if we're down on lower elevations, like over here at site 6, then all of the surge storage ends up being above grade, and that facility, that surge basin, ends up being an entirely above grade reservoir that would be subject to state safety, dam safety regulations and Division of Safety of Dams requirements. So this is a sweet spot for that particular part of the facility because it's a all below grade basin that's not excessively deep. So now we're going to move into the pipeline alignment alternative routing analysis. So we sited the pumping plant, as I showed you at site 10, and then we've got to look at a variety of different routes to get up to Bethany Reservoir. So we looked at a total of, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, so a total of 6 routes, although you see on here that route E is also omitted, similar to site 3 on the previous exercise. When we started layering additional information on here, we just felt like route E was not even worth carrying through the analysis and didn't even rank it. So we looked at several different routes, as you can see here. There's a couple of key objectives with this routing that we have to deal with, and a couple of key constraints, starting from the pumping plant that was sited up here, site 10, and getting somewhere into Bethany Reservoir. That's a key objective. To move 6,000 CFS of water, we need a total of 4 15-foot diameter pipelines. So there's a lot of pipeline that's required to carry that amount of conveyance. Those pipelines would be constructed using cut and cover methods for the most part, although there would be some tunneling required depending on the route and depending on the obstacles encountered, those obstacles being topography as well as several other features that exist out here in terms of utilities. There is the steep incline, and you can start to see it now on the contours. I'm sure many of you are familiar with looking at contours. When they're spaced out, things are pretty flat. When they start stacking up here, things are getting pretty steep. And so you can see the base of the hillside here, the topography starts climbing up, and there's a lot of little narrow valleys and canyons and peaks that have to be dealt with in terms of the finding and selecting an appropriate route. And then you can see all the conservation easements that are around the site and how those would play a role in the siting analysis. So here's the summary of the different route options. I mentioned that route E was eliminated before we even got into the considering of all the alternatives and routing. We used the same approach as I just showed you for the pumping plant. We have the importance factors listed here for all of the different sub-criteria, and then the color-coded system here visually indicating the green is good, yellow neutral, orange bad or unfavorable. So based on this analysis, the recommended alignment is site F, It has a couple of advantages that we're going to review here in just a second. So this is the route F coming out of the pumping plant here, and you can see the 4 parallel pipes. It does result in the shortest overall length, which is certainly an advantage. It discharges into a point at Bethany Reservoir that does provide for good mixing of the water. We looked at a couple of alternatives that discharged right near the outlet to the State Water Project system, so it would be a challenge to get good mixing within the reservoir, and there would have to be provisions incorporated to address that. The location of the discharge also avoids, there are several embankment dams associated with the reservoir. They're kind of difficult to see here, but they stretch along the whole sort of northeastern flank of the reservoir, and so the discharge point also avoids those embankment dams. It maintains very good distance from some of the sensitive receptors that were looked at as part of the siting study analysis. It avoids, or at least minimizes, conflicts with existing structures and conservation easements. It does require 2 tunneled sections to really address that previous bullet I just said. In order to get under the federal project penstocks, there's a small stretch of tunnel that'll be required to route those pipelines. And then as we hit the really steep topography here and trying to negotiate around these different conservation easements, the best strategy here is to do a short distance tunnel underneath all of that, and then incorporate an outlet structure that would also receive that tunnel. So this section here is a short piece of tunnel, as well as this over here. So this is I think the best alternative for this, or the best route for this alternative, and really does manage to accomplish as best we can, meeting the delivery objectives. So now we're going to talk about the tunnel alignment and maintenance shaft siting, again focusing on the stretch from Lower Roberts to the Bethany pumping plant and surge basin. You can see all the little squares and dots that were evaluated here. These were sites that were selected and evaluated based on the set of criteria listed on the left side of the presentation. The total drive distance is just under 15 miles. So given that we're trying to have maintenance shafts about every 5 miles or 4 to 6 miles, ends up meaning that we need 2 potential maintenance shafts along the route. And then in terms of the siting study, we assume about 10-acre sites would be appropriate for the maintenance shaft locations. Some additional criteria, desirable criteria, is that they be along existing roads. So either straddling, that's why you see these generally in pairs, straddling an existing road. That's not the case up here or over here, because there are constraints, such as in the Colony Aqueduct and different things that would prevent us from being on the other side of the road. But along existing roads is something that we're looking for. Being greater than a half mile away from existing schools or conservation lands, refuge, preserves, and then also being greater than a quarter mile from existing houses, were all key fundamental criteria that went into siting these locations. So what you're seeing on the map adheres to all of these additional criteria. These were built into the initial selection of setting these sites. So none of these locations are conflicting with any of these desirable criteria. So taking this siting analysis into account and looking at the tunnel alignment that we need to cover from Lower Roberts to Bethany pumping plant, we ended up siting an Upper Jones maintenance shaft and a Union Island maintenance shaft to cover the distance. And then what we're showing here are just straight line, rough tunnel alignments. There's still work to do to really massage that exact tunnel alignment to avoid some of the effects of overlying structures and things like that. But this is just a kind of a straight line depiction at this point. So the selected maintenance shafts, as I said, the first one is the Upper Jones shaft here. This is right along Bacon Island Road. And then the second maintenance shaft along the tunnel route is on Union Island, and it's just off of Bethany Road. You can see for other reference, there's some other references shown here. Clifton Court Forebay, for instance, just to give yourself some location and space. So here's just a recap of the different features that were cited for the Bethany alternative. Again, launching from Lower Roberts, the Lower Roberts shaft, and heading down, I have a maintenance shaft at the on Upper Jones Tract, another maintenance shaft on Union Island, and then receiving down at just south of Byron Highway at the Bethany pumping plant and surge basin, and then a set of 4 parallel pipelines that would be used to then discharge that water directly up into Bethany Reservoir. So I think we ought to pause here, Valerie, and see if there's any questions on the siting before we move into the next section, which is going to be on the RTM manager.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Hey, Karen Mann, I saw that you had your hand up previously, and then you took it down. I want to respectfully ask you if you wanted to ask your question first.
I do. Actually, I've got some questions and some observations about this Bethany alternative site. Thank you very much. Great presentation, Graham. Thank you very much. Is it Graham? Am I looking too far into this? It looks like it would be a great cost savings. Not having to dig a whole nother forebay. Was that part of your decision or part of the game plan here?
I don't think we know yet how the cost is going to shake out, Karen, but the cost of the pumping plant and the pipelines will still be pretty significant. So it's not clear yet if it's going to be a tremendous savings or what type of savings it may be. Those lower pieces are pretty, are still pretty big elements.
Okay, and then my next question, and for clarification, so this appears to me that there's no additional fish screens. Is that correct?
So there would be no additional fish screens. There would be no connection to any water bodies other than at the intakes way up on the north end, and then at the discharge to Bethany Reservoir. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Then yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you for
But
that.
there were no additional fish screens on the east or central alignment either, right?
That's true. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was my misunderstanding. I thought that there was, in addition to Clifton Forebay. I mean, already. Okay.
No, once the water
is
is screened at the Sac River, it's it stays isolated on that route.
Yeah, Karen, it discharges in the central and eastern, and it did discharge into the Banks approach channel here, but it was downstream of the fish facility out of Clifton Court. So
got it. Okay.
And Karen,
so
just to go back, do you mind to go back to your question about this alternative? So when Carrie did the presentation where she explained why she was requesting that we study this, there were 2 things. It met all the criteria and goals and objectives of the project, and it reduced, had a perceived reduction in impact. And as you can see, when you eliminate the southern forebay and the tunneling and the hydraulic structures along the aqueduct, you substantially reduce the footprint of this alternative versus that other one. So there's potentially a reduction in impact with this alternative, which is why it was added in the analysis.
So just so that I know, Catherine, or just for clarity for my brain, so now we're looking at 3 different alternative sites, or you're looking at 3 alternative sites to present to the governor. Is that correct?
Carrie has asked us to evaluate these 3 alternatives and do detailed engineering documents, which is why we are running through all of this with you all at the committee.
So Karen, if I can just jump in for a second, in addition to these alignments, there may be additional operation components that we'll be layering in. We have asked the DCA to look at different capacities, but we haven't yet gotten to operations. So I don't think that we can say in a definitive way that there are 3 alternatives. There may be more as we layer in alternatives.
Okay, and are we looking also at alternatives as far as inputs? I mean, we are on output, which is great. I'm glad to see some alternative considerations. But on the inputs, are they not movable, or is that got flexibility as well?
So the intakes are set where they are. There just weren't good alternatives for those.
Okay, final question. So I am aware that the amount of electricity that's required to pump water over the Tehachapi's to Southern California is just an amazing percentage of the entire state of California electricity. Now, what about this pump station? Are we looking at what kind of magnitude of electricity? Because that's a big deal with all the fires, electricity is a big deal.
There is no difference in power requirements between this or the east or the central. All of the water needs to get pumped up to the Bethany Reservoir.
Okay.
So in the last alternative, we were relying on the Banks pump station to pump it up. Obviously, when we use the Bethany pump station, we won't need to use the Banks pump station to pump this water up. This essentially will run independent of the Clifton Court, Aqueduct, and Banks facilities.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Great. And just a note, Douglas, I see you in attendees. I'm asking folks to move you over. So Barbara Barragan-Perea, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. I have several questions. Graham, one thing I can't remember because I can never remember dimensions. What are the levee heights for these maintenance shafts, kind of the berms for Lower Roberts Island all the way down to Bethany Reservoir, the different tunnel shafts? How high do you build up those levees?
Do you mean the pads themselves, Barbara?
Yeah.
The pad, okay. So the pads themselves are generally going to be constructed up to a height roughly about a foot or equal to the adjacent levees that surround them. So it will vary depending on what the individual site configuration is. Just in general, from Lower Roberts down to Bethany, these are fairly low elevation tracks within here, Upper Jones and Union and Lower Roberts. So these are probably going to be on the order, I'm just going to, unfortunately, Barbara, I don't have the number directly, so I'm going to guess and tell you 15 or 20 feet tall.
Okay. All right, because here is my series of questions or concerns. I recently saw a presentation for new modeling for flood inundation for the Delta that takes into account sea level rise, storm surge, and storm events running down the San Joaquin River. And it seems to me that, from what I recall, we weren't given a copy to keep, that this entire alignment is at one of the most vulnerable places in the Delta. They're forecasting tremendous flooding mid-century to 100 years out from Lower Roberts Island, all of Roberts Island actually, all the way down past Clifton Court 4 Bay heading towards the reservoir. So, and in particular, I think where you had put pump number 10, site number 10, I think I remember that as being a flood site. So I think that you all probably have a lot of homework to do along those lines. I'm also puzzled because right now I understand that the Jones pumping plant is being used at almost 100% capacity most of the time, or at least during pumping season. And at the last meeting, I know you talked about that you didn't need storage facility for water because it would be a continuous operation. So I have a question about how can Jones really actually handle this alternative unless there's significant work done as well to that pumping plant. And then my last question does dovetail a little bit back to energy, and thanks for asking that. Catherine Mellon, I heard your answer that you would have to, with the pumping to get the water up there, you would have to kind of increase energy use no matter which direction it came from. I think when we're talking about carbon sequestration and the fact that we really have to decrease energy use, it would be great to know if it could be any type of solar alternative for pump station number 10, and I think just kind of to operate the facility. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Okay. So, so first, Barbara, I think what you're referring to is work that the Delta Stewardship Council is presenting to folks right now. I actually haven't had a chance to see it. I know they've only shown it to sort of folks who are local to the area, and they're soliciting feedback and getting input. I can tell you that, and I do look forward to seeing it. I think their plan is to release it publicly within the next couple of months, couple of months, depending on what happens. When we were looking at different locations for this potential pumping plan and surge basin, elevations played a key role. At the site that we're showing here, the ground surface elevations range from about 40 to 50, elevation 40 to 50,
Okay.
which is pretty far above the floodplain. And I don't exactly know what water surface they were using. Again, I look forward to seeing it. But in our analysis, we worked with DWR to come up with a water surface elevation, a 200-year flood elevation that does incorporate future sea level rise and changing climate conditions. And that number is elevation 20.8 down in this area. And so we're still several many feet above that number, above that elevation at the pumping plant site.
At pumping plant 10?
Yeah,
Okay.
at the pumping plant and surge basin, it would be out of the floodplain.
Okay.
And then the maintenance shafts themselves and the launch shaft, the structure would be built up to the 200-year with all of those future sea level rise and climate change conditions, originating up at the Sacramento River at the intakes. So that's a pretty high, that's higher than many of the numbers down here in the Delta. And those shafts are being built all the way up to that top elevation just to ensure that there's no flooding or inundation inside the tunnel, or if there were to be some sort of malfunction or some other type of incident where the inside of the tunnel was flooded with a 200-year elevation originating at the Sac River, it wouldn't flood out of the shafts. So the shafts themselves are being built up to a very high level.
Does that make sense, Barbara?
It does make sense, because boy, looking at those maps the other day and thinking about this, my heart just kind of went bump, bump, bump.
Yeah, so what's driving the height of the shaft is really the Sac River hydraulic connection. That's higher than the flood level or the climate change level.
But
yeah.
Okay, maybe it's higher, but here, there's two problems that I see. I see that I think you still need to go back and really look at flood inundation on the San Joaquin River side, because the San Joaquin River side is the biggest flood threat, not the Sacramento. And the second piece of that, which we've told the Delta Stewardship Council, they're using sea level rise forecasts from the Oceanic Administration. They're kind of middle of the road in their forecasting. And we have always taken a position that you have got to build into this with flood threat the possibility of an accelerated event that kind of flips the switch, especially when you pay attention to what's happening to our ice shields every day. So I hear you. I'm sure you're going to get it right, but I'm just putting it out there. I think it's serious, and I think it's one of those places where this committee should say, please go back and double check your math.
Right. Very good. And
okay.
I do want to see what the Delta Stewardship Council is generating and producing. I just haven't had an opportunity yet.
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
But then you had a couple of others. The Jones pumping plant, which is the federal pumping plant here. The only way that pumping plant even gets involved is if the federal agencies are participating in the project, in which case they would receive a 1,500 cubic foot per second diversion down here into their approach canal, and then they would lift that up into their system.
Okay, so your pumping plant replaces that completely.
It doesn't even involve it. It's
okay.
Parallel. Yeah. It's parallel.
Okay.
Okay. You also had a question about solar. Is that?
Yeah, but listen, other people have got to talk. That's enough for me. You can send me an email.
I appreciate that, Barbara. I appreciate that. Wonderful. All right. We have, and I do want to be mindful of time. We have Sean, Anna, Mike Moran, and Douglas. All right, Sean.
I had a few questions regarding the easements. Who holds them? Who owns them? Were they set up to protect particular species or to insulate the reservoir? And why shouldn't we assume that the downslope habitats aren't as important as those that are in the easements?
Gary, can you take that?
Can try. So I am not the easement expert, but I can get some more help on this. Those are easements that are associated with different projects, and generally DWR and DFW hold a number of those easements. Really, DFW. The reason that we're avoiding them is that it's part of the term of the easement. So when the easement was created, it prohibits any construction activity on those easements. So we can't consider options that might go across them. As part of the EIR, we will absolutely be looking at whether there is the potential to affect resources with other parts of the alignment and consider any need to mitigate. But that was the reason that those areas are avoided. It's a requirement.
All right. Okay. And I just lost my, okay, I'm sorry. Anna, go ahead.
Hi. So looking at your slide, it seems kind of dismal to have this kind of construction activity a half mile from schools, a quarter mile from homes. That's still very close range. And so to me, that doesn't seem like a preferred alternative if it's that close to the schools. I wonder about the way that you analyze which plan is the best, and like how you balance that. So are you looking at it from a position of land use? Are you looking at, I mean, I know you're trying to be like holistic about it, but it definitely one view is being preferred over another, because if it was coming from a community aspect, you wouldn't put facilities within a half mile of a school, right? So what is the main driver of your system by which you choose these facility routes? And then, you know, I have a thing. My daughter has been learning recently about the water projects, and she brought up a really great point. But the point is that why are we building a beautiful Ferrari for water that's going to go into the aqueduct that is leaking, that is not covered, that loses 30% evaporation? It almost feels like that is not a good use of water. We're not being responsible with water. And so I told her today that I would say her comment out loud, because I thought it was brilliant, and we have to learn from our youth, and she's going to be the one paying for this $15 billion project. So from my daughter, she would like to know how, and I know it's outside the scope of the DCA, but I'm putting this out to the larger audience, is how can we build a Ferrari when past that point, we're going to be putting the water into an aqueduct that we know leaks, that we know isn't covered, that we know isn't using the water completely beneficially. So how can we responsibly spend that tax dollar that my daughter's going to have to pay back if we don't have a complete system that can use every single drop for the way that it should? So from the FFA girl, she would like to know, at least somebody have an answer to that. Thank you.
Okay, so Graham, can you? Yes.
Let's just record that question, and we'll respond in writing in the Q&A. I think there are some, some misinformation in that question that we want to clarify.
Okay.
But I appreciate the question.
So on the main driver, I mean, this is for siting things. This is an engineering analysis to site the facilities, and to lay out a concept project that will then be evaluated in detail with respect to impacts through the environmental process. And so this is by no means the finished product, but this is how we arrive at a reasonable project to take into the environmental process. There'll still be a ton more analysis and evaluation that looks at all of those specific effects.
Also, Graham, I think the proximity to school, I think Graham showed you a slide that shows what all the constraints are in that area. And so we had proposed that construction in that area that's near the school would only be done in the summer. And this is a pipeline. So, you know, once a certain section gets installed, you move further down the line. So we can isolate the section that's in close proximity to school and only do that work in the summer months when school is out. But we share the same concern around construction near schools.
So will you be putting those residents up in hotels while you're half a mile or a quarter mile from their house?
If there's a direct impact that would warrant it, it would be part of a fund for that type of thing. Yeah.
And then that goes to the dynamic that in fact community is part of it. It is one of those assessments being looked at in the EIR, and it is a factor in determining siting for this project. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody's looking to put facilities adjacent to a house if it can be avoided. So what you're doing is trying to optimize given the constraints that are in front of us. And I think that's what Graham's shown.
All right, we have Mike Moran, Douglas, Dr. Lytle, and Karen Mann, and I'm going to note that we are kind of getting to that point in terms of time. So if you can provide your question and we can answer it in the Q&A matrix, that's fantastic. If not, that's fine, but I just want to be mindful of time. Mike Moran.
Hey, thank you, and thanks, Graham. That was a great presentation, as always, and really good questions, too. I got several questions here. I'll chop it down, though. In previous presentations, we've had mock-ups of what facilities might look like on the landscape. Since this is going to be, as I understand it, a surface pipeline that goes from the pump station on up to the reservoir, is that correct?
It's cut and cover, so it would be buried.
Oh, it will be buried. Okay, great. So that'll be, okay, that's great. And actually, just if we can get some more clarification, we need this in writing too, about any scenario in which both Bethany and Banks would be operating at the same time. And I'm thinking of flood control, I'm thinking of big gulp, high flows, anything like that we can see when they're both being operated at the same time. And then I'll offer other questions in a written format. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Mike, if I may, the DCA is not part of the operational scenarios. It'll be developed by DWR along, down the line, how the two systems operate together. So we won't be able to answer that in our SEC questions. So I just want to apologize up front.
Oh, that's okay. I understand that. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Dr. Lytle and then Douglas.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. It's not a question about the operations. I'm just trying to remember. Banks is capable of pumping. Is it 10.3? And then this Bethany pump station would be capable of pumping 6,000 CFS. That's the one question. Second question. Just wondered if there's been any preliminary analysis on seismic vulnerability in that area. When you look at it, when you place another pumping station in, a half a mile square footprint with the other state and then the federal pumping stations, it seems like there's a seismic vulnerability area right there, you're sabotaging all your conveyance facilities out of the Delta. So it just seems that's got to be something looked at very, very closely. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's too bad. Phil would have the number to give you right off the top of his head, but you're in the ballpark, Dr. Lytle, on Banks. I think it is 10 and change is the maximum discharge.
It
and
is.
Then, yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Gary. And then I think you said it, but just to reiterate, the Bethany pumping plant would be designed to discharge whatever the determined flow capacity is. And so a lot of what you see in drawings is 6,000 CFS, but it could range between 3,000 and only 6,000, mind you, because the additional 1,500 to go up to a 7,500 CFS project would be shot off to the side over to the Central Valley project before it got into the big Bethany pumping plant. So the max of that pumping plant would be 6,000, even though the system itself may divert up to 7,500. ultimately depending on what the selected project is.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Good discussion. Also, I want to remind everyone that while the chat is enabled, we're not using it. And some of the discussion, some of the kind of reminders will be fantastic discussion during an upcoming portion of this agenda where we discuss future topics. So if we could just kind of keep that in its place so that we're mindful of agendas, that would be fantastic.
I just stuck a little thing in the chat that says don't use this. So
awesome. Alrighty, and so fine. Last but not least, Douglas, go ahead.
Yes, my question is, what's the present condition of the Bethany Reservoir? Do we have to do much improvement to bring up to speed?
That's a good question, Douglas. And we've started having some conversations with folks at DWR about the condition of that reservoir. To my knowledge, there's no impending critical issues with the reservoir. So, it is a DSOD regulated facility, Douglas, so it would be inspected periodically and it's on their list, I'm sure, to keep track of. But I don't know any more specifics than that at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sarah, I think, I believe Graham is continuing.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so we'll continue on with our
Can
next
we,
section.
before we move on, I think Carrie would like to just speak to those easements again, maybe help out with the question that was asked a little bit better.
Thanks. Thank you, Catherine. So I followed up to get some answers for you, Sean. And the easement that we're looking at, the one that is right next to Bethany, is an easement between DWR and DFW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's for California red-legged frog, California tiger salamander, San Joaquin kit fox, burrowing owl, and wetlands. And it was in response to the South Bay Aqueduct Improvement Project, so it's a mitigation easement.
Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Graham, thanks.
So this is the side benefit of being virtual, is that you can actually do research while we're working here. So that's fantastic. Real-time answers. Thanks so much.
Phone a friend.
So let's move on. Let's move on to the next thing, 4C, which is the RTM management plan updates.
Okay, great. So this is specific to the Bethany alternative. So a couple of, so we'll kind of go through the basics here. Just a reminder that the RTM is generated only at the tunnel launch sites. And so for the Bethany alternative, there's only 2 launch sites. There's Twin Cities, which is launching TBMs in both directions, north towards the intakes and south towards Highway 12 and Terminus Track. And then there's the double launch down on Lower Roberts, which is launching north towards Highway 12 and south down towards the Bethany pumping plant. So as a result, there's only 2 locations of RTM generation, and there's actually a bit more that would be generated at Lower Roberts, which is different than some of the, what we looked at for Central and Eastern. So we've got 6.6 million cubic yards being generated at Twin Cities and about 7.5 million cubic yards being generated at Lower Roberts. Again, just as a reminder, there is no southern forebay associated with this alternative. So there's no need, there's no use for this material associated with the project. There is no need for structural fill associated with the project. What it would be used for, though, is there are still plans, there would be plans to borrow material at Twin Cities and Lower Roberts to construct the maintenance shaft pads. And then that material the RTM material would be used to restore the topography of those borrow areas. But beyond that, it's not needed for the project. So we're left with a whole bunch more RTM, and so it led to some hard thinking and some other concepts about how the material could be managed for the Bethany alternative. Again, and then lastly, just as a point of reference, we talk a lot about millions of cubic yards, and so we've got a couple references down here at the bottom. How big is 1 million cubic yards? So it's if you took 600 acres of land and had material 1 foot deep, that's 1 million cubic yards. Therefore, if you had a 10 feet tall, 60 acres, that's 1 million cubic yards. Or if you took 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools, that's also about 1 million cubic yards. So the options that we're going to look at or that we have been looking at for Bethany Reservoir, option 1 would be to stockpile it on site. And that's something we've been, it's similar to what we've been talking about. Although, if you recall, for Central and Eastern, we use quite a bit of it down at the Bethany Reservoir to construct those embankments. But the remainder was stockpiled on site. So this is stockpiling it where it's generated. Option 2 is off-site disposal. So hauling that material off as it's generated and disposing it somewhere else for some other use, some other purpose. A lot of that would be quarries. There's a lot of quarries that need reclamation. They have plans to reclaim their quarries. And so oftentimes this type of material can be used as part of mining and quarry reclamation operations. So first we'll talk about option 1. We'll go through a series of slides here that look at the sort of the differences, contrasting the differences between on-site stockpiling for Bethany and in some cases, you'll remember a lot of this from Central and Eastern. So we're highlighting some of these differences here as we go through it. So to stockpile it all on site, that means we need the space to dry it before we can stockpile it. And this is a natural drying process that we've reviewed before. And so this site boundary is in essence the same site boundary that you saw for Central and Eastern, although it is cleaned up a bit on the east side because we don't need to have the rail connections to swing that material down to the southern forebay. So since we don't need the rail connections, we also don't need to relocate Franklin Boulevard, which was required to facilitate those grade changes. Stockpiling the material on site, we looked at a range of heights that we're going to show you between 15 and 25 feet tall. And so those stockpile dimensions are shown here. For a 15-foot tall stockpile, it would be a total of 222 acres for that 15-foot tall stockpile of RTM. And then as we work our way up to a taller stockpile of 25 feet tall, it would be 133 acres of permanent stockpile material. So now we're going to go through a couple of renderings here that help give a sense of what the site may look like. So here we're at a vantage point on Dearson Road. I hope you can see this little key map down here. I know it's small on the screen, but this is on Dearson Road, pretty close to I-5. And so the objective here is to give a sense of what the site would look like from I-5. And what you see in the foreground here is the launch shaft pad. So there's the soil pad here constructed, and then the extension of the shaft, the shaft walls sticking up to that 200-year flood elevation on the Sac River. So this sticks up a total of about 20 feet above the existing grade. And then off in the background would be the stockpile. So you can see it back there extending all the way from Dearson Road, and Franklin Boulevard would be behind it. So it's from Dearson Road all the way down to Twin Cities over a space of 133 acres. A different view. So now we're looking from Franklin Boulevard. So this is just south of the intersection of Twin Cities. So Twin Cities is running across the screen here and across this intersection. So we're looking at the stockpile from a closer perspective. This is again the 25-foot tall stockpile and what it would look like there if you were nearing that intersection. And then for comparison, also we've developed a rendering for the 15-foot tall stockpile. So this would be a more much broader area, but a shallower stockpile. So here we'll just show you side by side what that rendering would look like from the vantage point with the 25 on the right and the 15 on the left. I can tell you we've done a lot of considering and thinking internally about how best to deal with an on-site stockpile and whether it should be taller but over a smaller footprint or broader and shallower. At this point, we're thinking that a 15-foot tall stockpile would be better, but it would certainly consume more acreage. And so, but that is just our thinking. I know we would be interested in hearing from the SEC on what perspective they might have, and what perspective you might have on this. So now we'll look at Lower Roberts. Similar conditions. We've got the space required for natural drying. Again, this is for on-site stockpiling. A key difference here, though, is that the ground within Lower Roberts is lower elevation. It's on the order of -10 feet, elevation -10, sort of in the interior space here where the RTM would be stockpiled. For reference, we've highlighted some other elevations in the area there is the existing levee along the Sacramento River, along the Stockton Deepwater Ship Channel. That levee crest is typically around elevation 14, so it's about 24 feet higher than the interior elevations. And then there's Windmill Cove, which has elevations a little lower, but looking along the edge here, they're generally about 3 feet or so. So I just point that all out for reference. So would be down here at -10. And then one more item over here, there's some existing stockpiles of dredge material that are periodically deposited here. And those are typically up to about elevation 3, 4, 5, something like that. So these stockpiles here, which are adjacent to the existing levee, are also on the order of 13 to 15 feet. So looking at these site conditions, and again, taking into consideration the discussion from Twin Cities, we looked at what the different stockpile dimensions would be for the different height sites. And so here they are. It's 265 acres for 15-foot tall stockpile, ranging up to a 20-foot or down to 159 acres for a 25-foot tall stockpile. Considering what's around this site, considering the heights of existing levees and the potential view from Windmill Cove, as well as the adjacent stockpile areas, also we think 15 feet over a broader area would make the most sense here and be less of a visible feature as you're looking out over the interior of the island. So here is a rendering of that location. So this is on top of the levee. Windmill Cove would be just to the left, kind of back into the left here, looking over towards the Port of Stockton. So this is the 15-foot tall stockpile shown here. And you can still see in the background other operations, a lot of the cranes and facilities back with the Port of Stockton, and you can even see the top of the levees running along here. So this stockpile would be depressed down in the interior of the island. So now we'll talk about option 2, which is the offsite disposal scenario and considerations. I mean, first and foremost, it's a much smaller site required. We would only, it would only be held on site long enough to be tested and verified that it's okay to haul off site and use for quarry reclamation or for some other purpose. The way we've compared these two is we're assuming there would be no on-site drying, because if we have on-site drying, then it expands the site footprint back up to the full temporary footprint. And so if we're really going to compare these two options, we're going to assume that we're hauling the material wet so that we can really look at the benefits of a much smaller site. So we're assuming there is no on-site drying. In terms of hauling methods, there would conceivably be road or rail, but I'll show you as we looked at different options, there are some limits with respect to rail. And then disposal options, potential quarry reclamation, and then there's certainly landfill options. They always have a need for cover material and use of landfills. So comparing conditions at Twin Cities, we have the initial, this is the yellow outline of 510 acres. This would be what I just showed you if we were going to dry it and then stockpile it on site. For off-hauling it, the site would only need to be 175 acres. This still needs to have the shaft area, working area here. It still would need the perimeter ring levee to protect the interior of the site. There would still be the borrow area for construction of shaft pads. There would still need to be the wet containment cells for holding and testing that RTM before it's loaded and hauled off. But all the drying area that was consuming the whole rest of the space here would not be needed for this alternative. So there's a pretty significant difference in the construction size associated with that, with hauling it offsite as it's generated. Similarly, at Lower Roberts, just again looking at the construction areas, it's about 370 acres. If you take the area required for the shaft pad and associated equipment, and then all of the RTM drying and stockpiling area, and if we compare that to an immediate off-haul condition, it reduces substantially. We would still need the shaft pad area. We'd have the tunnel liner segments immediately adjacent to the shaft pad area. These are the spaces for temporary wet containment and testing and loading. So this would be where all the trucks are coming through and getting loaded, and this is where all the RTM would sit while it gets tested and before it's hauled off. And then this is a tentative area for borrow material that would be used for pad construction. So the total temporary footprint associated with an immediate or sort of a hauling it off as it's generated would only be 130 acres compared to the 370 for on-site drying and stockpile. Now, the transport options are really the key when we're looking at this scenario. You know, again, we have road and rail. For road, we're limited by the wet material. It's very heavy, so the trucks can carry about 13 cubic yards per truck. The total number of truck trips would be for average tunnel excavation rate would be about 3,600 truck trips per week, round trip. However, we do have to have contingencies in the considerations for peak production. If the tunnel boring machines are moving faster than average, could be up to 7,200 truck trips per week if all 4 tunnels are excavating at a peak production rate. Looking at rail, the ability to off-haul by rail for a 20-car load would be about 1,200 cubic yards per trip, 21 rail trips per week for an average production rate versus 42 rail trips per week for peak production. So as we look at the position of the RTM, we've got about half of it generated at Twin Cities and a little more, a little less than half at Twin Cities, a little more than half at Lower Roberts. We subtract off the amount that's required to restore the borrow areas and restore the topography there, and then calculate the number of total trips that would be required to haul off the remainder of the RTM. So it's about 450,000 total road trips, round trips, to off-haul that material by road, or about 5,000 total rail trips to off-haul that material by rail from Twin Cities, and then slightly more down at Lower Roberts because there is more material. So closer to 536,000 round trips by road and 6,000 rail trips to haul that material off. So then we looked at where would be potential locations to haul that material off to. There's a number of quarries in the area that are very active and have restoration plans in progress. So we'll just quickly run through those. There's the Vernalis site down here adjacent to I-5. There's several contractors that have quarries at that location, granite, Tykert, as well as a Knife River plant. So there's quite a bit of capacity there. And then we show the distances from Twin Cities which is further to the north, and Lower Roberts, which is further to the south. We also looked at the Ione quarries over there. We looked at the Sacramento landfill, but not just the landfill. There's the gravel mines, which are near the landfill as well, that they could definitely consume the volume of RTM that could potentially be produced. And then we also looked at the Tracy, the Tykert rock plant in Tracy, the Mossdale sand dredge pit in Lathrop, and the Calmat plant in Pleasant. A key thing to point out here is that none of these locations are directly accessible or along existing rail corridors. So all of these locations would, at a minimum, require a transfer of all of this material. It'd have to be handled again, offloaded from the rail, put into trucks for the final delivery to the site. So as a result, at least for our comparison purposes, is to assume that it would have to be by truck, because there are no current provisions that could handle delivery of this material by rail. So in terms of all the sites that we considered, we looked at them and estimated their capacity, how much room do they have for material that needs to be restored. So looking at the Vernalis site quarry pits, there's several different pits and there's a lot of capacity. These total up to about 33 million cubic yards of space estimated at the Vernalis facilities. Over at the Ione site, there's about 22 million cubic yards needed for restoration activities. And then looking at the Sacramento site, the Florin Perkins landfill and all the gravel pits, there's a tremendous need over there, but this is a very complex site with a lot of different facilities and features. So at this point, we've just qualitatively looked at it and said, yeah, there's room there. This would take a lot of future coordination, though, to sort out where this material would go at any specific time. So for the purposes of this comparison, we've recommended going with the Vernalis site. It has the capacity, and it is along the I-5 corridor, which has really good access. It's rural, so there would be a lot of opportunity for hauling and off-peak hauling. We wouldn't need to worry about nighttime hauling and that sort of thing. And then it does provide a conservative hauling distance that would really encapsulate all of the likely future options, because this is a little bit further from Twin Cities than say the Sacramento site. Truly a future solution could involve hauling to multiple places and so on, but this provides a conservative hauling distance that captures all of that in the consideration of whether it's a viable alternative. So as we look at the truck hauling to Vernalis, we're talking about from Twin Cities, 1,800 trips per week. That's average production rates. Remember, these two were totaled when I presented these numbers a few slides ago. So 1,800 trips per week for 2 tunnel drives, total of about 450,000 trips. The round trip miles to Vernalis of 106 miles. So we're talking about close to 48 million miles of truck miles to haul that material down to Vernalis. And then looking at Lower Roberts, same 1,800 trips per week, but a bit more material to deal with. So it's 536,000 total trips. Shorter distance to Vernalis, 66 miles, but still about 35.5 million truck miles required to off-haul that material. So in comparing these alternatives, we've listed out here the pros and cons of these different options. Looking at option 1, the on-site stockpile, there would be a substantial reduction in truck traffic and associated emissions compared to off-site disposal. I mean, we're talking about approximately 83 million trucking miles associated with hauling that material. Having it stockpiled where it's generated, although the CEQA analysis assumes that these stockpiles would be permanent, the reality is this material would be available for Delta Reclamation District uses, for levee maintenance or other beneficial uses. And the reality of the situation is, and this is documented in the Delta Stewardship Council Delta Levee Investment Strategy, there is a considerable amount of fill required to get the Delta levees even up to current PL 8499 standard, not considering future sea level rise. We've estimated, through just looking at their analysis and information, it's slightly more than 13 million cubic yards of material required to get all of the Delta levees up to a current PL 8499 level. And we're talking about having roughly 14 million cubic yards of material available. So although it is assumed to be permanent, this would be available for local uses. And the on-site stockpiling would give time for the industry to come along and advance electrified hauling vehicle technologies. This commercial stuff will likely be available over the next decade. And so this would give it time for the industry to catch up in terms of what the impacts would be. Some negatives associated with the on-site stockpile: certainly the aesthetic issue of those very large stockpiles is a key issue. And then there's a significant land requirement for drying and stockpiling on the order of about 500 more acres than would be 580 more acres than would be required for the off-site disposal option. So then looking at option 2, the real main advantage is that there's substantially less both temporary and permanent area required at Twin Cities and Lower Roberts to dry and stockpile that material. But the big negative here, as we've been talking about, would be the significant load of truck traffic and associated air emissions, greenhouse gas emissions along the I-5 corridor and near the Port of Stockton. And then if all of that material is off-hauled and used for quarry restoration or landfill uses, it would not be available for local beneficial uses. And so that's another con working against option 2. So comparing these two, the recommendation that we're recommending that DWR consider in the CEQA document on-site stockpiling of this material. So with that, I think we're to the point where we'll take questions, Valerie.
Okay.
From the group.
All right. Great information. I will note that we're going to put some guardrails on this discussion. We've had a lot of RTM discussion over the last several months about what it is, what it looks like, smells like, feels like, all of that. So we really are going to try to focus today on these plans, these options, the engineering around it, the construction around it, the logistics around it. So if we could please do that, because I think that that would be a constructive use of time. I think we've answered just about all the questions, all the answers that we have with regard to the process and the actual substance. So Anna, you've had your hand up for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So regarding the Twin Cities site, I wonder what your rationale is for choosing that site. It feels a little dismaying because the landowner still is unaware that you guys want to bury his property that's been in his family for, I don't know, 6 generations under, you know, a huge pile of muck. I'm concerned about the direct correlation between the reserve and its relationship to that parcel. I feel like you guys are making decisions based upon satellite imagery and that you haven't actually been out to these sites. I'm very familiar with these sites. There's a lot of work out there that's being done to expand crane and crane territories and to restore vernal pools. And so I wonder what the significance of that, besides its relative, you know, association to Twin Cities. It's very dismaying to have DWR select a dot on a map and say, this is what we're gonna, this is the parcel we're gonna bury under tunnel muck. And the owner is, you know, at the same time going in a different direction to conserve the land. I am absolutely godsmacked at 1 million truck trips. I don't even know how that's possible in our area. I don't know how we will survive through that many truck trips and through that many much traffic. And then finally, on your last slide, you know, the justification seems a little disingenuous about the aesthetic issue. That is the #1 reason why you should not be stockpiling it on land. 2, you don't have the buy-in from the landowners, and that's very, very important. This is still the United States of America, and you're not allowed to go in and take people's land and cover it with tunnel muck. Thank you for letting me speak.
All right, thanks, Anna. So with regard to any of the engineering components that can be addressed in that.
I can address some engineering elements, Valerie.
Thanks.
I think your first question, Anna, was why Twin Cities, and I'm sure you recall that we went through a pretty extensive siting study to look at launch sites, and then for the North Tunnel launch, we evaluated a whole range of sites, and that site has certainly engineering and logistical advantages that help it rise to the top. This is an engineering analysis and an engineering study, and many of the impacts in terms of environmental and community impacts will be evaluated as part of the CEQA process. But as an engineering recommendation, that's the recommendation. I think that's the only engineering question that was within that.
And if the landowner isn't willing, do you take the land by eminent domain?
So that's
I think, again, that's not an engineering question.
Exactly.
So
that's not relevant to what we're doing right now. I'm sorry.
All right, Barbara, I think you had actually, we're supposed to go next. I saw you next on the list. If you want to go ahead, go ahead.
So this is real quick. We have an option 1 and option 2 scenario. We have an option 1 scenario where there's stockpiling that leads to aesthetic problems and significant land takes for Delta landowners. So that's not ideal. And then we have option number 2, which alleviates the problems from option number 1, but leaves communities of color with increased GHG emissions and air pollution. So what I don't understand a little bit in this rationale is if we believe that there's going to be improvements in vehicles and equipment in the next 10 years, couldn't we work on pushing that to happen at the port and near the port in an accelerated fashion so that you wouldn't have to implement option 1 with option 2 getting all the pollution? In other words, you could skip option 1, you could go to option 2, but you wouldn't be overly burdening the option 2 community. it seems to me that you've got this box or that box, and neither one is ideal for doing what is best for everyone fairly in the Delta. And my second question is, it says the material isn't available for local beneficial uses, but aren't there places near enough by where quarry operations, someplace else on the perimeter where you could store more materials for later levee upgrades, especially if we push towards getting in clean construction equipment and clean trucks? I mean, we just had an executive order from the governor today that we're supposed to have all vehicles electric in California by 2035. You know, what could we do to accelerate things so that we could do the best out of these two?
Mm-hmm. So Barbara, I think that's a really good question, and we did talk about that. And I think Carrie, I'll ask you to chime in here if you don't mind, but I think there are some limits with respect to what the CEQA process can assume and whether we can build into that assumptions about electrified vehicles. It's one thing to say that it'll be available for others to come and get, and they'll probably have the technology up and running, but we're not addressing the impacts of reclamation district potentially hauling that material. That would be through a separate CEQA process and through a separate EIR. But I totally get what you're saying. And if electrified vehicles were the solution and combined with option 2, then our discussion would be different. But I think that's where the rub is at this point. Can we assume that electrified vehicles would be the mode of transportation?
Yeah, and you know, at least holistically for us, solving these problems equity isn't about you hurt one group to protect another group. It's that you try to do the best you can and lift everyone up at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it is, Graham, technology isn't keeping up with kind of where we are at this point. So things will adjust as things move forward, correct? As the project moves forward?
Right.
Yeah, and I have a couple things to add to that, Barbara. I agree with you. I think if the electric trucks existed today, there might be a different discussion on the on-site stockpile. If there was something, a location nearby that was a long rail that needed it, that would be really helpful. In terms of, we know that the reclamation districts in the Delta need this material. It's hard to find. The Lower Roberts site is near rail. It's, you know, there could be, there's a bar, you could build a barge landing there to make that easier to move around the Delta. There's some advantages for stockpiling at Lower Roberts. Twin Cities, to get that into the Delta Islands and along the levees, you're really talking about trucking, and it's a lot of truck vehicles. So because we don't have a guarantee right now that we could use electric for that, that just adds to the air emissions and GHG of the proposed project at this point in time. I'm fairly confident there will be vehicles down the line available for commercial use, especially in light of the announcement from the governor.
So this is such a massive project. Do you have any leverage to force these kind of things to happen faster with industry? Real leverage? It's a huge, expensive project.
Well, it's not so much leverage as it is buying power, you know? I mean, if they're available on the market and we mandate them and we create a demand for them, then that helps move the market. And if high-speed rail and the city of LA and some other people join in, then you start gaining some leverage there. Port of Stockton, yeah.
We'll
So,
say
yeah,
that,
I mean,
that we did.
We're thinking similarly.
Yeah.
Let's let Carrie give her comments. I think she's been trying to get in there.
Oh, it's okay. I really am just agreeing with what Catherine's been saying. Barbara, I think that we did explore this because that would be our preference as well. We just didn't think that we had enough security that those facilities or those vehicles would be available to count on it. So I think continuing to think about ways to push that technology is definitely worth considering.
Okay, Mike Moran.
Hey, Graham, thanks again for the presentation. Just as far as up at Twin Cities, as Anna mentioned I mentioned earlier on, it's big crane habitat, vernal pool potential up there and such. Any studies on just the physical impact of putting that much soil on top of the existing land as far as compression, groundwater infiltration, runoff patterns, things like that that change the Cosumnes area or impact it, I should say?
Yeah, there's still going to need to be work done, Mike, and it's going to be based on site-specific data at some point. You know, if the but right now there really isn't a lot of very good site-specific data. What is available, we've been able to study and look at, and the ground conditions are better there. I mean, that's one of the factors in the siting study that we looked at was the condition of the ground, and you're getting out of the delta, you're getting out of some of those really soft, peaty organic deposits. You're starting to get into, you know, thicker clay sequences that are, you know, have a bit more strength to them, and so there's better ground conditions anticipated there, but there's going to be a lot more work that would be required down the road, Mike, to really sort all of those effects out. So, I mean, it's a good question, but at this point we don't have answers at where we are in the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And given that answer and the previous conversation that you know, both Carrie and Catherine weighed in on, it sounds like this is a plan for the moment. It's going to continue to be refined based on the dynamics around it. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, and even if you recall the post-construction land restoration work that we went through, I think last time or the time before, there's quite a bit of site-specific testing that would precede construction, occur during construction, and then after construction to figure out what the effects of all that site activity have really done to the foundation and what it's going to take to restore those conditions and return them back to productive use.
Got it. All right, thank you. Okay, and we have, and again, I'm going to be mindful, it's 5:11. We have Peter Robertson, CC Giacomo, and Dr. Mel Lytle. So, Peter.
Thank you. Real quick, I was just doodling my math here on the volume of RTW, and one of the subtractors that I don't have in doing the trucking on this is, what is our percentage of contaminants? That's an example, product that's going to have to go to Kettleman City that we can't use for the things that you've been talking about here for the last 20 minutes.
So again, unfortunately, we're going to be somewhat limited, Peter, by having site-specific data along an actual tunnel alignment, because that's, you know, we're going to need a project first, and we're going to need a tunnel alignment, and then data can be collected along that alignment to figure out if there's any potential contamination down at the tunnel depths where this material is going to be generated. Based on what we know, there's no reason to anticipate significant, you know, any levels of contamination. Although in some, you know, in our soil balance work that we've gone through, where we consider on-site reuse and that sort of thing, more for Central and Eastern, we did assume 5% would be unsuitable for whatever reason, whether it was just not the right size material, it was too big, cobbly, whatever, or it was impacted by some sort of contaminant that would make it unusable, then that would be off-hauled. So that's built into the Central and Eastern analyses. But for the purposes of Bethany, where we're at right now, we haven't allotted a piece. I could foresee doing the same thing, saying some small portion, maybe 5%, needs to go to a different location, off-site, Kettleman, whatever it is, for landfill disposal. And
Graham, that data, environmental data, will be available when we finish the geotech program this year. That sampling is part of the program.
Right. Thank you.
All right, Cece. Cece, you are muted.
Okay.
There
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I'm very concerned about the area around Twin Cities. You know, they have flooding issues there now. If you put 15.2 feet of stockpiles of RTM in there, you're going to severely impact their situation that's already a problem.
Right. So, Cece, that's also a very good comment. That the area that you're talking about, you're totally right. It does flood periodically, and those floods are not they're not intended. I mean, that's within the perimeter of the levee system, within the perimeter of the reclamation district. Unfortunately, the east side of the reclamation district is the rail line, which really is not is not really intended to function as a levee, but it does get used that way. So I totally hear what you're saying, and there certainly is going to be more work required to consider what the impacts of that permanent stockpile are going to be on the broader flood conditions internal to the reclamation district. But that of course is not an intended condition. I'm sure everybody would love to avoid that internal inundation altogether. But for what it is, we're still going to have to look at that as part of future conditions.
Great. Okay, Dr. Lytle, and then Sean Worth.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a little troubling in the sense of, I think, I've been talking about RTM ever since the beginning, I think. There's lots of questions regarding RTM, and I won't even get into that. But I think the whole concept about whether or not reclamation districts can use this material or not, because it's stockpiled, we don't even know yet. And so it's a really hard thing to think about stockpiled material that's essentially a tunnel waste to be used by reclamation districts for levee improvements, of which we don't even know if it's a usable product. So that's a big question. Another thing is, I think it's really important, when you begin proposing this type of thing, that you look at it, there's got to be a very good siting plan. Are you going to have a lined versus unlined facility? Is it going to be capped? What is it going to be capped with? Are you going to revegetate? What are you, there's a lot of huge questions about the management of, 13 million cubic yards of materials. And so I think that there's a lot of work. Ultimately, I think your options, one or two, are very too contrasting. I think you have to look at it a little bit more of a blended solution about being able to take some of it to offsite disposal areas. You can stockpile at the port. That's something they've done there for years. EWR spent $10 million to stockpile rock out there at the port. There's a facility there already. And so there's lots of things that you have to understand. I mean, and you're even looking at a 5% haul off to Kettleman City, that's 50,000 truckloads. These are huge, numbers that you're talking about how to manage the RTM in this project. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Lytle.
Yeah, I think a couple of details, Dr. Lytle. So in terms of the stockpiling of the RTM, the plan would be to hold it in containment and test it and verify that it's not, doesn't have contaminants of any form that would limit its potential use. Once it's cleared testing, then it goes into the drying process, or it goes to hauling it off wet. And so the drying process then would not be a lined system. At that point, it's been cleared as having nothing in it that would limit its application. And then in terms of the finished stockpile, we would, if there were going to be a so-called permanent stockpile there, it would be seeded with erosion control grasses so that there's not going to be just continual runoff of that material. But we wouldn't want to, deep plant it with anything that would prohibit its future use potentially as borrow material. On the ability of the reclamation district to use it, there will be more testing done of this material, certainly, to answer any remaining questions. But everything that we've seen so far indicates that it is suitable material, meets the geotechnical properties. And you remember Steve Manassian's presentation from a few times ago that talked about the different conditioners and really focusing on organic-based conditioners that are now hitting the market and really helping to limit what might be added to that material as part of the tunneling process. So I think we're making good headway, but I also agree with you that there's still a tremendous amount of material, and that is true. You're absolutely right. So all of these options have
have a lot associated with them just because of the volume. I agree.
One quick follow-up.
On the engineering, yes?
Yeah. When you're looking at your initial analysis of whether or not the material is usable or not, you're not taking into consideration the chemistry of long-term weathering of that material due to years and years and years of environmental exposure, and how that potentially affects that material into the long term, and how that might affect that material and the water that goes through it, and how that might contaminate the environment around it. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lytle. Go ahead.
To say,
Graham. Yes,
yeah, just to say, I think Dr. Lytle, those are still questions that will be answered. So I just didn't want that to go unanswered. That long-term, potential weathering and so on was something that will be evaluated as we start to create. At some point, we're going to need to start to create more of this material so that we can test it and validate it and see how it behaves over long term.
And again, this has been a discussion that we've had several times in this committee with regard to the usability as well as the testing and the evaluation that determines whether or not we're able to use the actual RTM. So I just want to note that this question has been asked and answered several times, and I know that it's front of mind for a lot of folks on the committee, but we definitely want to make sure that we're focusing on the engineering at this point, because obviously there are a lot of questions that we're just not going to be able to address until the point of use. Sean Worth and then Cece, I guess you got knocked off, so we'll do Sean and then Cece. Go ahead and ask your question again. Sean, go ahead.
I shared Dr. Lytle's concerns about the usability of the muck, but I wanted to bring up a geologic, biologic issue in that area. It's already been mentioned that floodplain is active. The Cosumnes floodplain is active. It floods every 7 to 10 years. That's a major conservation area for many species, including sandhill crane. Sandhill cranes every 7 to 10 years flush to the north and to the east to find upland forage areas. They don't like to go far from their typical lands they normally use. The area south of Elk Grove is being consumed very fast by urbanization. An argument could be made it's worth exploring the possibility of having an upland forage area created with the muck if it was potentially viable based on the chemistry, long-term viability on a willing seller's land to provide potentially a permanent upland forage option for the cyclical flooding of the Cosumnes River floodplain, as well as future climate change and sea level rise. That's not a suggestion. It's not a suggestion to do it. It's a suggestion that it's worth exploring.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And Cece. Did we lose you, Cece?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello?
Go ahead. Hit it, Cece.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be fast so I don't get knocked off again. I had a second aspect to that, not just the obvious risk of flooding to the people, but that flow flows to the preserve. So that needs to be considered too. That's very, very important. If we have a flood there that's exacerbated by the 15 to 20 foot stockpiles of RTM, remember that flood is going to flow toward the preserve.
Yes, and I want to, yeah, I understood, Cece, and I just want to reiterate that where we're talking about for the stockpile and Twin Cities operation, it's within the reclamation district, so it's not within the floodplain itself of the Cosumnes. I just want to be sure that that's clear. But I understand that flooding is common within the reclamation district, and I know that I-5 floods through there and how that behaves, and so we are taking that into account as we look at laying out the site and considering what the eventual impacts may be.
Thank you, Graham.
Can I get a clarification from Sean on his comment, if you don't mind? So Sean, are you suggesting of doing some kind of natural reclamation to create habitat? I just want to make sure I understand what you were asking us to look at.
There's paucity of upland forage opportunities for sandhill cranes near the Casumas River Preserve. So having some more available that are long-term could be potentially very useful, but that's got to be taken in the light of all of Dr. Lytle's concerns about the viability of that soil. And it really should be on somebody's land who's willing to have it there, on a willing seller. But there's a shortage and an increasing shortage of nearby upland forage for cranes because of urbanization in Elk Grove, and the fact that every 7 to 10 years that floodplain fills, and the fact that climate change is here and sea level is going to rise and it's going to become more common.
Okay. In terms of, on the use of this material for the reclamation districts and levees, we've covered. If we didn't feel confident in the use of this material for levee construction, we certainly wouldn't have used it to build the embankments for the southern forebay. So we feel like that issue is has been addressed and closed. But obviously with the upcoming work, we'll reconfirm those conclusions. In terms of the material for some kind of habitat construction, that's not something that we have looked at yet.
It would need to be able to support agriculture because the cranes have to forage on something. So you need to have corn or rice or something that's a viable food crop for them.
Okay.
A big dust pit wouldn't do them much good, but something that was a viable food source would be a potential option.
Thank you. That clarifies it. Sorry, Valerie.
No, we're good. Thank you. This is important stuff to make sure that we can get it right. All right, Sarah, next item. We are on
on mute. Hang on. There we go. All right. So now we are getting on to the SEC questions or comments for the August 26th meeting presentation. So Valerie, why don't you take it away there?
Sure. At our last meeting, we had presentations on the design refinements regarding intakes, traffic reductions, and logistics plans, as well as a higher level discussion regarding the Bethany alternative. Obviously, we've dug a little deeper in this meeting with regard to that. So wanted to see if, in fact, as we do at all of our meetings, there was additional discussion, clarification that was wanted related to any of these items, and also any discussion about outreach that might have been done and what you're hearing from your communities. Mike Moran, you have your hand
up. That was just for the previous section. I'll write down that question. I have nothing to add here. Thanks.
Are you sure? Okay, sounds good. All right, well, in the meantime, were there any questions or clarifications needed with regard to our last meeting? Okay, oh, Anna Swenson.
Hi, so when I was discussing this with a community member, they reminded me that during the BDC water fix, there was actually an Appendix 3F that needs to be looked at and revisited, because it talked a lot about the direct impacts of the locations of the intakes, and there's no reason not to use information that we've already gathered. This is the same project, so I really would like to suggest that. And then I'm really concerned that we're not using Delta land knowledge, that we're really relying on fish and biological, which are also very, very important. But I think that we need to make sure that we're integrating also the land use expertise that we have here in the Delta, especially from people like Gil, who really understand, you know, what the impacts will be, the physical impacts, because it's very clear that you guys are looking at maps and plotting things. And I understand that process is a start, but in order to make actually like integrated good decision making for a good project, you need to bring in that wealth of information from like the appendix of the BDCP water fix, from our engineers, from the Delta land use folks that are here, that are willing, that are really our experts. And so I called you again to please try to use those folks to gain better knowledge and not just make this project sightings on a map.
Okay, duly noted. I think that there have been a lot of discussions about utilizing information from past studies where possible. So I think that's happening. Douglas.
Unmute yourself.
Yes, this is regarding the intake 3 and 5. Well, some of my constituents, they ask, they are in the maintenance area 9 south, which is near the Mare Island. And according to their study, the levee condition is very bad there. So they are wondering if you guys will reinforce or improve the levee condition when you do an intake there. This is a maintenance area 9 south near the Mare Island.
Yeah.
So maintenance area 9, yeah, the DWR maintenance area 9, Douglas, is what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did a delta-wide evaluation of levee vulnerability, and that was based on a variety of factors, including geometry. And I do realize that some of the Sacramento River levees, I mean, many of them are overbuilt. They're taller than they need to be, but they also are built out of sand in a lot of cases, and they have varying amounts of seepage and under seepage problems. In terms of what the project would accomplish, we looked at the vulnerability of all the levees that could affect various elements of the project, and then considered what would be the appropriate response. It wouldn't necessarily be going around and fixing every levee all over the place. That would, obviously be a massive undertaking. But in terms of addressing the potential flood risks at the sites, we looked at a whole host of different things, including structural repairs and non-structural repairs. For the most part, non-structural repairs, non-structural solutions are the better approach. So emergency response, flood risk training, a whole bunch of different steps that can be done to reduce risk, and ensuring that there are provisions for all the workers and everything at the site to get to safety if there is an event. If in situations like Bolden and Lower Roberts, we did include some repairs to existing levees based on the vulnerability of the sites and the RTM processing areas, but the intakes, we did not include repairs to the levees, far upstream and downstream as part of the project. But we do have, for the area that the project would touch, there would be repairs to those existing levees and cutoff walls and everything else.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Are there, Mike Moran? I see your hands up.
Yeah, didn't think of it when you first asked me. Sorry about that. Hey, just a couple quick questions. They're kind of related. I saw that in the comments for our last meeting too. There were several questions that were asked about designing in, recreation facilities and mutual benefits and things like that. And I don't know much about it, but I want to see how appropriate it is to bring in the Davis-Dulwig considerations into this and how the design actually goes into the features of water facilities. And then another question is just to clarify what Catherine said, that the RTM was at least preliminarily evaluated for use for reclamation, but not for habitat use. Is that correct?
Well, we did a thorough analysis to make sure that it could be used as structural fill. I think, Graham, you can speak to this, but when we did the presentation, this material is, 150 feet below ground. It's clays and silts. It's not organic material like you have at the surface. So you have to have an additive to it to start some kind of growth. And then you can rely on cycles of growth and death to kind of start planting some seeds. But it's a relatively inorganic material to start with.
Yeah, that's right, Catherine. Mike, we did look at both agricultural and habitat uses in that post-construction restoration effort. And the difference just being that but we didn't see anything about the constituents or properties of the material that would prevent it from being used for habitat purposes. But like Catherine said, it just needs, we got to spread, we got to take the topsoil and organics from the site and till those back in and reintroduce some organic material to get the growth started. So no, there's in that restoration or post-construction restoration effort. We looked at both, and it's good for both. It's fine for both. It just needs working. You got to work it and sort of get it ready to go. But there's nothing about it that prevents it.
Okay, and is that including just physical subsidence reversal and putting topsoil atop that? Was that ever thrown into the fray?
So the effort, so I think what you're referring to, Mike, is all kind of captured in that post-construction restoration work, because that's where we also looked at disking and tilling and ripping and all these different things that would be done to try and fluff it back up and add amendments back in and how that would all work. And we did cover that as a module, I think, maybe two sessions ago.
Great.
But there's a lot of information in the presentation packet.
Thanks.
Sure.
And regarding Davis-Dahlweg, I'm going to need to phone a friend on that one too. We are working on Davis-Dahlweg and we're working with the Department of Parks and Recreation, but one of my team members is leading that effort. So I'll follow up with you after the meeting.
Great, thanks so much.
Terrific. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the discussion to the group. I think we're going to move on now because it sounds like everyone feels pretty comfortable with the information they have, and they can always, of course, everyone from the SCC can always phone in, email in, and whatever questions may arise, we'll go ahead and add those to the Q&A matrix so that they can be shared, that information can be shared with the group. So Sarah, our next item.
Yeah, it's time for public comment, and I don't believe we have too many. We've got, it looks like 3 for Sherry Norris, OSHA Meserve, and Dan Whaley at this point. So Valerie, why don't you lead that off?
Yes, so the order we're going to go in is Sherry Norris, OSHA Meserve, and Dan Whaley. So Sherry Norris, we're going to move, again, the process is a little bit different. All of these folks are attendees. So in order to have the public comment the way we typically do, our folks who are at the controls need to move them over, and then you can go ahead and either unmute yourself or and also your video. So with that, Sherry, are you ready to go?
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great.
The system works. The system works.
Yay. Well, my question is related to the survey. And my understanding is that this is not, the survey that's going to be done is not really aimed towards the tribes. But I just wanted to ask 2 quick questions or provide comment. One is, you know, our organization has worked for a very long time. I work for the California Indian Environmental Alliance with the State Water Resources Control Board and California Department of Public Health on surveys, fish consumption surveys. And since they are going to be including some fish questions, one, is there an opportunity to assist in reviewing the surveys that you guys are putting together so that they can be in sync with some of the things that we've learned over many years, not just ourselves, but our other colleagues that have worked on these fish consumption surveys? And 2, when the results come out, is there an opportunity before it's a final draft for the public to provide comment on how the results are being interpreted?
I'm hearing your 2 comments as you're offering the opportunity for us to use, for the DCA to use that information, or actually it's DWR. I want to make sure that we're real clear. It's not a DCA survey, it is a DWR survey, as well as an opportunity to discuss after the fact how information is being translated or reviewed, correct?
Well, yeah, in part, it's when you look at the results and you tease out what they mean, that's like interpreting the results.
Sure.
And so there are times where we have seen the results interpreted and there's pieces missing. So if you can have a stakeholder or a public ability for some groups to look at how those results are being interpreted, that would make it be more accurate. And then regarding the survey itself, we know that DWR has done surveys and the Water Board has done surveys before as well, but I don't know that DWR has done a lot of fish consumption surveys before, but the Water Board and those of us that have worked with the Water Board have. So I am recommending some sort of a cross-pollination there, and that there be stakeholder groups for both the creation of the survey and for the interpretation.
Okay, your comments, because it's public comment, we're just taking comments, so we will definitely note your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe the next one was OSHA. Hold on one moment. Yes. OSHA Meserve.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. OSHA Meserve, local agencies of the North Delta. Couple of comments. First of all, I heard the discussion today regarding sea level rise, and I think, just hearkening back to the presentation that was provided in, I believe, July regarding the preliminary rejection of any alternative that didn't include a diversion in the North Delta. Part of the reason for that rejection was that supposedly those other alternatives would not meet the climate resiliency project objectives of DWR. However, I think in answering, there were questions from the SEC today about, well, what about, sea level rise implications for Bethany alternative, for instance? And the answer was that, well, we don't really know what the sea level rise projections are for that area. So I think it's very disingenuous and untrue that there is an objective criteria by which these alternatives that don't include intakes in the North Delta are being rejected. So, I think we don't believe that those alternatives have gotten a fair shake, especially when your own technical people can't point to any particular sea level rise criteria being used. Secondly, I am very concerned that when DWR and the DCA are giving updates to other entities that are meeting about the Delta, the SEC process is discussed as being this great place where there is work being done to reduce and address impacts on the environment and the community. But when those presentations are given, the key language at the top of the SEC agendas is not recounted, and the constraints on this process are not disclosed. And in particular, that this process is constrained to technical engineering issues, and it's not part of the DWR or CEQA process, and that it's not being tracked for CEQA. So I think it's very important that everyone who's recounting the SEC outputs and inputs be clear on what the constraints are as well. Otherwise, I think it's very misleading, and I think folks at Delta Stewardship Council and elsewhere have taken a different impression than they ought to, based on some of that failure to disclose the constraints. Last, just on the reusable tunnel muck or material, what we call muck, I think it's very insulting that you would think about putting hundreds of acres of muck, which is really a landfill, on top of some of the best farmland in the world.
Thank you, OSHA. All right, Dan Whaley.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Dan? Hello, Dan? Dan, did we lose you? All right. What we'll do is we'll include Dan also in our next round of public comment. And Dan, you can go ahead and address whatever you need. And if you'd like a little extra time, we can totally do that. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll move on. All right, Sarah.
I think Sarah just got disconnected and asked for a phone number so she can call in.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so I think she's saying that we need to move forward with the running of the meeting. So what's our next item coming up?
We are on 5A, and that is NASLI.
Okay, NASLI. This is the 5A SEC tour updates.
Yes, and can actually somebody else send the phone number to Sarah? Sorry, I was just about to.
Yes, I believe Claudia is doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Or Jennifer.
Just want to let folks know that the website is up, And our tours are on the website. I know it's a little tricky to find right now. The website will be updated in the next few days. But in the meantime, all of this info will be found under the last SEC meeting. And then we're also going to post up the information as well on the T-Screen tours we took. I think that was it on the tour update.
Terrific. All right. Item 5B. Barbara, if you want to introduce that.
So now is the time when we'll be talking about the November Stakeholder Engagement Committee meeting topics. What are the outstanding questions deferred to future meetings, and if there's anything more about Bethany alternative logistics and truck traffic.
Do we want to actually talk about the date as well? Because we were saying no.
Yeah, there's the slide there.
Yeah.
Hey, can we go back to that previous slide? I just want to add in here. So what we did is we went through all of the SEC questions that have been asked historically since the start of this process, where the response was that we would cover it in a future meeting. Many of those we had covered in a future meeting, but there's a cleanup of about 10 that hadn't been included. So we're going to cover those items in the next meeting. And Sean, that includes your questions around the power corridors that we're proposing for at least the east and central alignments. That was it.
Awesome. And we're also just for, go ahead, Barbara. I know where you're going.
Could you just, for the benefit of the SEC members, just briefly run through what those items are? The potential ones. You said there's like
there was a request for renders of final sites, and I think there's some sites where we hadn't had renders. We can do that. Operations phase, truck traffic, we can take a stab at that. There were questions around existing train traffic and idling in South Stockton and how our project would intersect with that or affect that. Power corridors.
Well, it sounds like we'll have a lot to discuss. Thank you for.
Yeah, we'll have 1 or 2, maybe 3 slides on each one of these topics so that we can close out the question and answer log.
Great.
Barbara, can we also note that we're going to move up item 8 and combine it with 5B so that we can, you'll note on here it says November SEC meeting topics. So Nasli, do you want to address that?
Yep, I sent an email to everyone at the SEC and just wanted to get everyone's take on it because we have gone down to 1 meeting a month, usually the 4th Wednesday of each month. But November and December, given that there's holidays, wanted to talk to everyone about rescheduling the meetings. I was going to propose we go to the 2nd Wednesday, but that actually falls right on Veterans Day. So I'm going to put out a proposal and would love a show of hands, or we could just talk about it to see if this is okay with everyone. Our proposal is that we actually move, in order to avoid holidays throughout November, that we move our next meeting to the first week of November and cancel the October meeting. Otherwise, there would only be a few days, basically a week in between the two. And then I would propose that we stick with the 2nd Wednesday in December for our December meeting. So it would be canceling October and then Wednesday, November 4th and Wednesday, December 9th for the year. Again, any objections or folks are okay with that, please let me know.
Barbara has her hand up.
I have my hand up for another reason, but the world is going to be exhausted the day after the election. Could we make an exception and do it on a Thursday so some of us could get some sleep?
We said this too. And listen, by the way, I didn't want to be disrespectful. The Wednesday of Veterans Day is also an option. It is a state holiday for workers. I don't know if everyone, actually, I'm not sure if it's a state holiday in California. I'm sorry. So that is also an option, but happy to take a look at the 11th, or in reference to what you said, Barbara. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, because some people are working on campaigns too on this. So
yeah, you know, or the day that everyone can meet is Wednesdays. So again, I don't know if folks are able to look at their calendars quickly, if we can decide this. And that includes staff as well. But if Thursday the 5th, I could send around a doodle. Again, if anyone has any thoughts to that or agrees, please speak up.
Can we have some hands up? Do me a favor, Jasmine, could you take down the presentation so we can see all of our little faces? And that might make it a little easier. I see Cece, Anna, and Karen all have their hands up. If there's something different that you want to propose, go ahead and let us know. Otherwise, we can just do a little consensus based on everyone's little squares. If you could turn on your video, I think that would make it easier.
I would invite staff to join that as well.
I was just wondering, is November 18th a holiday?
It's not. It's just getting close to Thanksgiving.
That would be okay even.
Yep.
Yeah, that's my preference.
Closer to Thanksgiving's fine. November 4th is my 47th wedding anniversary. So frankly, I'm going to be a little busy that day.
Good for you, Karen.
Your husband can join.
Congratulations.
So one thing I'll ask is, Catherine, will there be enough time between then, the November 18th and the December meeting to be able to get everything done that needs to get done on the engineering side?
Yeah, I mean, we're fine with that spacing. That puts 3 weeks in between.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Including a holiday. So really it's kind of like 2 weeks.
We work through holidays.
Yeah, we do.
No rest for the wicked.
November 18th, okay, the 3rd. If I don't know if people want to show hands again, if folks want to, I can also email out the dates, but it is a Wednesday, which is a day that we know most folks are free, same time.
That will be 2 months from today.
It will be.
I don't mind moving it to a Thursday or a Tuesday if that works better for folks either, and keep it in that week of Veterans Day.
Everybody know how to use Doodle? I don't want to sort of make anything confusing, but how about I send a Doodle poll? And it'll have you just put your name in and you put the dates you can do it. And then we'll just go with sort of a majority rules, okay?
Thank you.
All right. So
You
we'll
still have my hand up.
Sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
So this question was for Catherine Mellon and for Carrie. Carrie, thanks for the chaotic phone call with me around harmful algal blooms. I'm happy to report it took only 2 weeks of aggravation to have working internet again. Thank you. So in some ways we could talk more, but because you are doing a list of things that have to be addressed, I'm still wondering if there's an opportunity for us. I understand that we can't talk about operations or even probably water quality enforcement, but I do wonder if there are opportunities in design and construction for creating solutions for water recirculation for HABs. And if we're coming to the end of this, I would really prefer for us not to miss that opportunity if one does exist.
Sorry, I thought someone was about to talk, so I was waiting for a second. Yeah, so Barbara, I think that in my mind, that falls under some of the community benefits discussion. So that's really where I was seeing that, but I agree that that's something that would be good to talk about.
Okay, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
What specifically did you mean, Carrie? The water quality or the HABs or?
No, the possibility that when we're talking about community benefits, that we could be looking at projects to address or improve conditions related to HABs.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And Anna, I see your hand is up. Did you have anything? Or is that just residual hand waving?
No, I actually had a question. So should we plan that December's the last of the SEC meetings?
I don't.
No, I think we won't be finished with the Bethany alternative as we showed there until March. And then Carrie had talked about using the SEC in some way to discuss community benefits framework. So I'm not sure how long that discussion might go on, but.
So maybe like June of next year?
Possibly.
Okay. I just hope to be able to take a vacation at one point or another.
Okay. Sarah, are you back? I'm looking for you.
I am back, but I can't see anybody. I'm only on the phone.
Okay.
So where are we right now? We're done with the public comment? And we did non-agendized SEC questions or comments. Can you do that?
I think we need to identify those members of the SEC who will be representatives to the DCA board meeting in October. I don't think we did that yet.
Yeah, it would be really good if the SEC members would do that, because it would be, we'd like to hear from you folks.
Okay, and Nasli, I think where we're at is that if folks are interested in participating and presenting to the DCA board, they contact Nasli and she hooks them up so that they have good information, good video, visuals, all of that for a reasonable presentation. If anyone feels comfortable now saying that they want to participate, go ahead and let us know. Other than that, offline, I think has been working just fine.
Yeah, we haven't had any volunteers, I believe, for the last 2 months. So if anybody wants to speak, by all means, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go with that.
Terrific. So we need to do public comment for item 5.
Yeah, non-agendized items.
I'm so sorry. Can I bring up one reminder to the SEC that I emailed about today?
Mm-hmm.
Just a note again that within a day or two, we're going to put up the application for a SEC member to join representing the Hood community. So any help SEC members can give around. When the application's up, I will email everybody so that you can pass it around, and we'll probably have it open for 2 or 3 weeks to allow folks to apply.
Great. Okay, and I'll also note that it was no one that signed up for public comment for item number 5. So go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Great. So I think now I'm prepared. Forgive me, Barbara. You go ahead and do it because you've got your stuff there.
So the non-agendized SEC questions or comments. Yeah, we have this is that time and place where we set time aside so that folks can discuss items that are not necessarily agendized as presentations. Karen, I see that your hand is up. Yeah, and
Thank you. Noting the new revision, the Bethany Reservoir alternative, and the proximity to the community of Mountain House, you may want to consider a representative of the Mountain House community. Just FYI.
Thank you, Karen.
That's a great comment. All right, anything else? Non-agendized items? All right. Do you want to call for public comment as item 7, Sarah?
I think we had a public comment from Ocean Reserve, didn't we?
We do. We have OSHA Reserve who wants to provide public comment on non-agendized items. So OSHA, go ahead. You have 3 minutes. Has she been moved over?
Sorry, I had emailed and said I would pass. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much, OSHA. You know, we really appreciate it when folks just kind of take time into consideration. So with that, I think because we already did item number 8, so we're on item 9, which is adjournment. Here is a reminder of when our next, we changed that date. It's no longer November 4th. So we'll be sending around an update of what that meeting date looks like based on the doodle survey that Nasli is going to turn around. And so with that, Sarah?
Yeah, so actually, my system is just coming up. Can you believe it? Just now, just in time to open up. I think I'll do this anyway. We're getting ready to adjourn. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending. And I know this is an interesting time. I hope everybody's air is clearing out, and at least where I am, we've got breathable air again. And so please, if you can, get outside, get some exercise, wear your mask, stay distant, and take care. And thank you again for this meeting is adjourned.